Chapter 571. In Capital. The residence of the third assistant governor was grand and luxurious. In the depths of a garden, the Lord Assistant Governor sat in his study. His eyes were slightly closed, his complexion calm. After an unknown period of silence, he suddenly opened his eyes and looked out at the blooming flowers outside the window. A gentle breeze blew past and the petals swayed, sending forth bursts of fragrance that refreshed the heart. The Lord Assistant Governor took a deep breath and said in a soft voice, "It should begin." There was a faint smile on his lips, his heart incomparably relaxed. All these years of patience and caution had finally borne sweet fruit. Soon, the world would be thrown into turmoil. But the Lord Assistant Governor didn't feel any guilt, because this was the price they had to pay. Everyone in this world owes them a great debt. Sea of Purgatory. Under the dim skies, 2 men and 1 woman silently walked forwards. Their bodies were wrapped in a layer of blood-red light, dark and deep. Not too far away, on a rock, the monster beast lowered its head and tore at its flesh and blood. Looking at the clothes it wore when it was alive, as well as its scattered white limbs, it should have been a beautiful woman. But now, this was only the monster beast eating flesh and blood. The sound of flesh and bone being torn apart was enough to make one's scalp tingle. But the 3 people walking forwards didn't seem to see or hear anything at all. They looked straight ahead, not retreating at all. The monster beast's ears moved. It looked up, revealing its bloody mouth. Its cruel eyes fell on the 3 people. In the next moment, its body froze. With a plaintive cry, it threw away the flesh and blood in its mouth and ran away with its tail between its legs. It was as if there was something on these 3 people that terrified it. Soon, the 3 people climbed up a mountain and stopped in a hollow. The man in front held a disc in his hand, constantly pacing back and forth. After turning around several times, the man stopped. He lifted his foot and stomped down. The ground in front of him collapsed, revealing a bottomless hole. It was unknown where it led to, but faint traces of aura overflowed from within. Half of it was black and the other half was white, intertwining with each other. He handed the disc to the man behind him. Then, without hesitation, he jumped into the hole in the ground. Quietly, like a stone falling into a river, there wasn't a single wave. But he had changed something. Between the black and white, there was a twisted blood-red color. The air was thick with the smell of blood. The second man did not frown. He handed the disc to the third man and jumped into the cave. Only the woman remained. Her features were as beautiful as a painting, and her skin was fair. As she watched the blood-red color grow thicker, there was not the slightest fluctuation in her eyes. Who would have thought that just a few days ago, she, a young lady of an assistant governor's mansion, would be so frightened that she wet her pants on the spot when she found out that she had suddenly entered the list? He raised his hand and tapped the disc. Blood-colored patterns appeared on its surface, interweaving to form a strange face. It opened its mouth and howled soundlessly. The entrance of the cave trembled, sucking in the black and white auras that had almost been soaked in blood. The next moment, the hole disappeared. The woman put away the disc and turned to leave. Her light footsteps soon faded into the distance. Yu looked at the ruins of the city that still existed. He let out a breath of relief, a relaxed expression on his face. He took several steps forwards and flew in like a shadow. As soon as he landed, he frowned and looked up. His eyes were icy cold. The pair of blood-red eyes behind the door hesitated for a moment before finally moving away. Seeing that the other party didn't bother him, Yu moved. After several breaths of time, he submerged himself into the ruins. A moment later, he found an empty room. After carefully sensing that there weren't any dangers, Yu carefully pushed open the rotten wooden door. Dust fluttered in the air as he stepped inside. He sat down cross-legged, took out several pills, and swallowed them. Qin let out a long breath, his face paler than before. With his current cultivation, he could even fight an early calamity immortal realm cultivator. Even in the entire land of divinity and demons, he could be considered an absolute powerhouse. But today in the Sea of Purgatory, he was in an incomparably distressed state. If it weren't for the sharp senses of the cosmic Seacross Bell, he feared he wouldn't have been able to arrive here in one piece. It was impossible to verify the origins of the city ruins in the Sea of Purgatory. In the legends, it was built countless years ago, and although it was now in ruins, there was still some residual power left behind. The various monster beasts and evil beings that lived in the Sea of Purgatory wouldn't easily approach the ruins. Of course, this didn't mean that the ruins were an absolutely safe place. When he first entered the ruins, the blood-red eyes that stared at Qin from behind the door were the greatest terror of the ruins. Those were dried corpses. It was rumored that they were the residents of the city that lived in ancient times. For some unknown reason, they had become like this. Within the demonic path Sea of Purgatory's database, there were detailed records of the dried corpses in the ruins. These were a group of monsters that couldn't be killed. Even if they were torn to pieces, they could still be reborn. And these monsters had a perverted desire for the flesh and blood of living beings. If they encountered one, they would fight to the death. Luckily, these dried corpses were also imprisoned. Most of them could only stay in their own houses or move around in a fixed and narrow range. As long as one was careful and didn't intrude into their range of activity, there wouldn't be too much danger. But the originally dangerous Sea of Purgatory had now become a land of death. Could the relatively safe ruins of the city still be believed? Qin didn't know. Thus, he decided to rest here for a while. Once his body recovered, he would immediately leave. Suppressing these thoughts, he closed his eyes and began to adjust his breathing. As Qin was recovering, several more guests arrived outside the ruins of the city. Shen Yuanin's face was covered with a veil and her entire body was spotless. Her temperament became increasingly cold and indifferent. Of the 12 female cultivators that followed behind her, only 7 were left. The rest were nowhere to be seen, their fate could be imagined. Their clothes fluttered in the wind. The group of 8 flew into the ruins. Only now did they turn around. A massive shadow stood far away from the ruins. Its 4 eyes deeply looked at them before it turned and left. Bang, bang, with each step, the earth shook. On the ruined, desolate, and deathly silent street, the doors of the houses on both sides emitted creaking sounds. Pairs of blood-red eyes appeared, staring at them through the cracks. Or, it was more accurate to say that the vast majority of eyes were focused on Shen Yuanin. Her eyes were indifferent. As she swept over these greedy and cruel eyes, they were as cold as jade, without the least bit of fluctuation. Suddenly, there was a loud roar. The heavily decayed doors instantly shattered into countless pieces, wrapped in gray gas. They tore through the air, emitting shrill screeches. A purple and red figure followed closely behind. This was a tall and withered corpse. All of its flesh and blood had withered into a thin layer that clung to the surface of its bones. Its hair was as white as withered grass, wildly ruffling in the wind. It roared, revealing withered yellow teeth. In its deeply sunken eye sockets, 2 blood-red eyes were filled with greed and bloodthirst. This was a corpse that could leave the room for a short period of time. Shen Yuanin lifted a hand and pointed at the void in front of her. There were no fluctuations of strength at all, as if she were a light breeze. It was as if firecrackers had been lit in the chest of the mummy that pounced at him as fast as lightning. By the time it fell to the ground, it was already a pile of purple and red flesh. Its mouth bit down on the ground, slowly wriggling forward. Shen Yuanin turned and walked away. The female cultivators behind her silently followed. When they disappeared around the corner of the street, several wooden doors opened at the same time and several corpses rushed out, snatching away the pieces of flesh on the ground. The wriggling head was held in the arms of one of the corpses. The corpse returned to the room and bit down on the head, happily sucking it up. After several breaths of time, the street quieted down once more, restoring its original tranquility, and an empty room that could be temporarily set foot in appeared. On the other end of the street, Lei Fong gulped. His face was a bit pale, but his eyes were turning, clearly calculating something. After several breaths of time, he turned and whispered something to the two people beside him. The three of them turned and followed. The current sea of purgatory was far too dangerous. If they could grab onto a thigh, that would naturally be for the best. There was no day or night in the sea of purgatory. The gray skies and tumbling fog filled the skies all day, leaving one's mind feeling particularly depressed. Qin Yu opened his eyes and silently calculated. Another 2 days passed and he immediately frowned. In the blink of an eye, 6 days had passed. But, he still hadn't been able to enter the depths of the sea of purgatory. If things continued like this, he feared he wouldn't be able to find Shuba before the time limit was up. As for whether or not he could miss the deadline, that was impossible. Otherwise, Ing City's Great Array formation would close. Unless the outside world opened it on its own initiative, it would be impossible to leave. It had to be known that Ing City's Great Array formation had been completed since the founding of the Great Chu Empire. After 30 million years of constant strengthening and improvement, even a calamity immortal would find it hard to shake it. And the next time it opened would be several million years from now. No matter who it was, if they stayed here then they would turn into dirt. He couldn't delay any longer. Qin Yu stood up. After sensing that there was nothing wrong with the outside world, he flicked his sleeves and opened the door. His pace wasn't fast, but as he rose and fell, his figure flashed by. In several blinks of an eye, Qin Yu arrived at the edge of the ruins. He stepped forwards and shot into the skies. But at this time, his complexion changed. With a shout, he came to a sudden stop and punched out. Bang! There was a dull sound, like a tsunami erupting. A giant net appeared in nothingness, dented by the strength of his fist. Qin Yu borrowed the strength of the shaking to draw back. In the next moment, the net rolled up, wrapping around him. The figure of a giant spider appeared outside the ruins. It stared at the retreating Qin Yu and screamed in anger. If it weren't for Qin Yu being a moment faster and being wrapped up in that spider web, he feared he would have become food for this spider. Qin Yu's heart chilled. He suddenly felt a bit numb in his hand and his complexion changed. He looked down to see that a layer of flesh and blood had been corroded away. This bit of poison was instantly absorbed by his index finger. The flesh and blood around the wound wriggled and soon regenerated. Roar! The giant spider outside the city suddenly roared. Its compound eyes flashed with an ominous light. It stared at Qin Yu, its eyes filled with blazing heat and greed. Its giant limbs danced about, tearing open fissures in the ground. Qin Yu's heart sank. He found the reason. That spider web was stained with a portion of his flesh and blood. The powerful blood vitality of an emperor-level demon body was undoubtedly a fatal temptation to monster beasts. Roar! A deep and low roar sounded out. The giant spider seemed to feel danger, but before it could escape, a fist arrived and sent it flying away. A figure gradually became clear in the smoke and dust. He walked in front of the spider web, closed his eyes and took a deep breath, an intoxicated expression on his rotten face. Qin Yu's pupils shrank. This figure was the one he encountered not too long ago, the one with the terrifying aura. Perhaps it was because he had swallowed and absorbed some flesh and blood essence, but the state of his body's decay had improved. Black energy lingered around him. His soul suddenly throbbed. A terrifying feeling surged out from the depths of his heart, causing Qin Yu to stiffen. He fiercely looked up, his eyes colliding with the corpse's. A deep and low voice sounded out in his mind, "My prey, you cannot escape," he had been targeted. However, the corpse was the same as the spider. It clearly dreaded the ruins. Its eyes blazed with heat, but it hesitated and didn't move forwards. Qin Yu calmed down a little. His thoughts raced, but before he could think of a plan to escape, a heaven-shaking explosion sounded out in the southeast direction of the city ruins. What followed was the excited howls of the corpses. In the blink of an eye, countless houses collapsed. With loud rumbling sounds, dust shot into the skies. Shen Yuanin lifted a hand to wipe the corner of her mouth. Blood dyed the back of her pale fingers, making her look even more startling. There was a pool of blood on the ground. Cold air rose up from it, and there were even tiny pieces of ice mixed within. The hidden dangers within her body were becoming increasingly serious. Listening to the chaos outside, Shen Yuanin furrowed her eyebrows. Then, she composed herself. She put on her veil and pushed open the door. She was once again the cold and venerated master of Nine Heaven Mirror Moon Palace, not weakened in the least. With a flick of her sleeves, several corpses that broke through the walls froze in midair, falling to the ground and breaking into countless pieces. "Let's go." Her blood was enough to drive these corpses crazy. They couldn't stay in the ruins any longer. Rumble rumble from all directions, the sounds of walls collapsing and houses collapsing constantly sounded out. It was unknown how many corpses were crazily rushing towards them with bloodshot eyes. Lei Feng's face turned green. He thought he had found a powerful thigh, but who would have thought that in the blink of an eye, he would have to flee for his life. But now, he had no other choice. If he left these female immortal sect cultivators, he feared he would die even faster. Shen Yuanin stepped forwards, still calm and composed. Her attacks were light and gentle, but wherever she went, there was no longer any life left behind. The sublime emotion forgetting code, forgetting one's 7 emotions and 6 desires, as well as compassion for all living beings in the world. When she attacked, there was no room for mercy. The roars of the corpses rapidly approached. The loud rumbling was enough to prove their astonishing numbers. Qin Yu's complexion immediately paled. A leaky house met a rainy night, the rotten corpses waited outside and the corpses went berserk within. For a time, there was nowhere to go. Bang! At the end of his line of sight, several houses were smashed to pieces by the corpses. They howled in excitement as they crazily rushed inside. Qin Yu looked up. What he saw was the figure of a group of women. Unlike their delicate appearance, each one of them was swift and fierce. In particular, the veiled female cultivator seemed to have cultivated some great ice attribute supernatural power. As soon as they approached the corpses, they were instantly turned into ice sculptures. Behind them were 3 men. They were bitterly resisting the attacks of the corpses. It's them. Qin Yu's eyes darkened. Lei Feng seemed to sense something. He turned to meet Qin Yu's eyes. After a moment of surprise, he clenched his teeth. The demonic path had always been protective of their own. Although he had a high status, he didn't want to be targeted by the demonic path. Since he had attacked that day, Lei Feng didn't plan on letting Qin Yu live any longer. It was just that the corpses had suddenly retreated and he had let Qin Yu escape in a moment of carelessness. Originally, he had felt a bit restless about this, but since he had encountered them today, it was naturally for the best. Lei Feng's eyes brightened. He lifted his hand, took out a purple jade pendant, and crushed it to pieces. Bang! A halo of purple light erupted, wrapping around the surrounding corpses. But it didn't shrink and crush the corpses. Rather, it suppressed as many corpses as possible and moved them away. Looking at the purple halo of light howling towards him, killing intent rose in Qin Yu's eyes. He instantly understood Lei Feng's sinister intentions. To divert disaster to someone else, to kill with a borrowed knife, was this a move he had already used? Pa! The purple halo of light shattered and a rain of corpses rained down from the skies. Although they were more fascinated by Shen Yuanin's aura, the smell of the flesh and blood in front of them wasn't bad either. Seeing that they couldn't break through the layers of encirclement, after a brief moment of hesitation, the corpses roared out loud. They adjusted their positions and hurtled towards Qin Yu. Humph! With a cold snort, Qin Yu stomped his feet. The floor tiles instantly shattered into countless pieces that floated in the air. With a flick of his sleeves, each piece was endowed with a terrifying strength. They tore through the air and shot out in all directions. Bang, bang, the corpses were pierced through one after another. A formidable strength continued to act upon them, sending them flying away. In the blink of an eye, the area around Qin Yu had been cleared. Lei Feng's heart shook. On that day, Qin Yu had directly fled and hadn't revealed his true cultivation. This strike was already astonishing enough. With such a cultivation, how could he be easy to deal with in the demonic path? Now that both sides had formed a death grudge, it was impossible to resolve it. If he didn't die in the sea of purgatory, he feared there would be trouble in the future. Lei Feng's eyes turned. He loudly said, "Fellow fairies, that person is extremely strong. He might be able to share the pressure for us." Shen Yuanin's eyes were faint as she looked at Qin Yu. Although he wore black armor and she couldn't see his appearance, she didn't know why her heart trembled. But this trembling of his mind only lasted for a moment before it was suppressed by a powerful will. His indifferent eyes turned even colder. At this time, Shen Yuanin suddenly felt that she loathed him. The 7 female cultivators at her side saw the palace master remain silent. They turned around and flew straight towards Qin Yu. Although they seemed to be smoothly slaughtering the corpses, their losses were extremely terrifying and they couldn't maintain this state for too long. Sharing the pressure was undoubtedly the best choice. As for whether or not doing this would place Qin Yu in danger, they didn't care at all. As long as the palace master was safe and sound, let alone one person dying, even if 100 million lives were lost, so what? Qin Yu's eyes were ice cold. He swept his eyes over these people. In his eyes, these female cultivators were the same as Lei Feng. Although he feared the corpses, Qin Yu didn't want to fall into a tide of corpses. Moreover, these people had ill intentions. Qin Yu's eyes became even colder. He took a step forwards and rushed out of the ruins of the city, speeding away in another direction. Roar! The corpses roared. The ground trembled with every step he took. Lei Feng, who was filled with excitement as he rushed towards Qin Yu, suddenly shivered. His face paled and he screamed, "Don't go over there. That corpses are too terrifying." Shen Yuanin stopped. It wasn't because of Lei Feng's warning, but because she felt a tyrannical aura from that corpses that left her feeling dread. How terrifying! The corpses looked over and their eyes brightened. But after a moment of hesitation, they didn't stop. They continued running in the direction that Qin Yu had fled. This little girl's blood vitality was excellent, but comparatively speaking, he preferred the little fellow in front of him. That aura was really familiar, as if he had eaten it a long, long time ago. Chapter 572. Its body trembled and the corpse instantly turned into black fog, vanishing where it stood. As Qin Yu ran away, his heart fiercely shrank. He stepped into the ground and forcefully came to a stop. Looking up, he could see black fog gushing out from thin air. It tumbled and collapsed inward, condensing into a figure. "Little thing, where do you think you're running to?" A deep voice sounded out in his mind. Qin Yu took a deep breath and continued to run away. When he first saw this corpse he had sensed how strong it was. Today it was even stronger, he couldn't fight it head-on. But before he ran too far, the black fog appeared once more. The corpse laughed, "Don't struggle anymore. Let me eat you up." Freak. Only an idiot wouldn't run. Qin Yu turned and ran without any hesitation. "Humph." The corpse sneered. In the next moment, a terrifying aura arrived. It was like a towering divine mountain that suppressed the world. Qin Yu roared out loud. He stepped forwards and his speed rose. In the next moment, the ground around him caved in, revealing a giant palm print. "Your reactions are quite fast, but how many times can you dodge?" A terrifying feeling appeared once more. Qin Yu dodged to the side. He could hear the creaking of his leg bones in his ears. The Emperor-level demon body was indeed formidable, but it still couldn't withstand the eruption of strength that surpassed its limits. "Undying, can you escape?" Qin Yu roared out in his heart. Undying's voice was calm. "This corpse has some supernatural ability that has locked onto your aura. Unless you block or stop this lock, no matter how far you run, you will be overtaken by it." There were some words that Undying didn't say. He could almost confirm that this corpse was a great figure when it was alive. He couldn't imagine just what it had experienced that could cause such an existence to fall to such a state. Qin Yu's heart sank. His thoughts raced and a sharp light flashed in his eyes. He had already made a decision. Divert the disaster to someone else. You aren't the only ones who know this move. Bang, the ground shook. Qin Yu drew backwards, avoiding another attack from the corpse as he raced towards the ruins of the city. Although the rampage of corpses was terrifying, he had to choose the lesser of two evils. Returning to the ruins would be extremely dangerous, but at least he had a chance to survive. The corpse clearly sensed Qin Yu's intentions. It suddenly roared, its voice like a sharp thorn that drilled into the depths of Qin Yu's mind. Qin Yu staggered and stuffily coughed. Beads of blood flowed out of his mouth and nose as he tumbled around in a distressed manner. Looking at the ground that had caved in by a hair's breadth, Qin Yu gulped. He wasn't in the mood to feel ashamed. Fortunately, he was not far from the ruins of the city. After dodging two more attacks, he could see its figure in the distance. But now, at the edge of the city ruins, there were countless dried corpses. They howled like purplish-red waves, constantly crashing against the city ruins. Even though the corpses were slaughtered in the blink of an eye, they were like moths flying into a flame, not knowing what fear was. Although he couldn't wait to see this group of people die without a grave, the current situation left him with no other choice. Bang! Exerting strength in his legs, he leaped up and landed heavily on the ground like a falling boulder. Countless pieces of mud and stone splattered everywhere, sending the surrounding dried corpses flying. He didn't care about his surroundings. He turned and looked outside the city. The giant corpse had already come to a stop and was staring right at him. It did not come over. Qin Yu's heart relaxed. He let out a long breath of relief. It was only then that he felt his legs ache and he was exhausted. Although it had only been a short moment, every breath of time just now had been spent on the edge of a blade. He had been on the edge of life and death. If he had made the slightest mistake he would have become a piece of flesh and blood chewed up in the mouth of the corpse. The dried corpses would not give Qin Yu any time to rest. They howled and rushed up, taking the initiative to deliver the flesh and blood to their mouths. Moreover, the taste was quite good, so there was no reason for them to miss it. Qin Yu took a deep breath. With a thought, he vanished from sight. In the next moment, his figure appeared in the nine-realm Holy Land Saint Sun token space. Looking up, he could clearly see what was happening outside. Although the dried corpses had retained a portion of their consciousness, they clearly didn't have the ability to sense the Saint Sun token. In addition, Shen Yuanin's aura was constantly releasing temptation. After losing their target, they only hesitated for a moment before turning and rushing back inside. Qin Yu sat down cross-legged. He took out a pill and swallowed it, revolving his cultivation to refine it. As Lei Fong saw Qin Yu return, he was stunned. Was this boy an idiot? He actually ran back to die. But in the blink of an eye, he saw the corpses guarding outside the city. His entire body froze. Bastard! These dried corpses were already terrifying enough, but they had actually brought back an even more terrifying fellow. The city ruins had a powerful imprisoning ability towards the dried corpses. They couldn't leave as they pleased, so as long as they could rush out of the ruins they could escape. It was because of this that when the group reached the edge of the ruins, they were greeted by the dried corpses, all of them desperately trying to stop them. Just as they were about to kill their way out of the encirclement, Qin Yu actually came up with such a trick. Once they left the ruins, they feared they would be greeted by the terrifying attacks of the corpses. Looking over, because Qin Yu had suddenly disappeared, the corpse was clearly enraged. It roared and black energy tumbled around its body. Seeing this, Lei Fong nearly fainted. He couldn't resign himself to death. He absolutely couldn't. These women from the immortal sect might still have a chance to live, but his hands and feet were weak. Where would he find a chance to escape? That corpse had chased Qin Yu away, and now it was chasing him back. It was clear that its true target was him. As long as he could force Qin Yu out, the crisis of the corpse could be resolved. Yes, that was it. Lei Fong screamed, "Senior apprentice sisters, that person has wild ambitions. He wants to kill us all. We cannot let him go." Qin Yu brought the corpse back and concealed his tracks. Hearing Lei Fong's words, the eyes of the 7 female cultivators turned icy cold. Shen Yuanin frowned. She lifted a hand and pointed at the void. Her finger seemed light, but it was like a falling mountain falling into a great lake. In that instant, great waves surged out, sweeping out in all directions. Within the Saint Sun token, Qin Yu's complexion changed. He looked at the veiled female cultivator, his eyes cold. In the next moment, the space he was in seemed to synchronize with the outside world. Ripples spread out. Although they were weak and didn't have much killing power, they were enough to force him away. Shua, Qin Yu's figure appeared where he was. Before he could do anything, a pleasant but icy voice sounded out in his ears. "The target of the dried corpses is me and the target of the corpse is you. If we join forces, we might have a chance to survive. Otherwise, we will all die here." Qin Yu had no expression. "How can I believe you? If you believe me then you will live. If you don't believe me then you will die. Direct enough." He punched out at the dried corpses. As he looked at the corpses waiting outside the ruins, Qin Yu's eyes darkened. "All right, I agree." Both of them were smart people. There was no need to speak too much. After exchanging a few words, they understood what the other needed to do. Shen Yuanin lifted a hand and pointed. Wherever her fingertip went, space came to a standstill. The dried corpses wrapped within were directly sealed in ice. Bang! Qin Yu's feet fell. His figure was as fast as lightning as he moved through the stopped space. The frozen corpses shattered one after another. Lei Fong's eyes widened, his mind still in a daze. Wasn't she supposed to kill him? What was she doing? Roar! Several dried corpses roared as they rushed forwards. Shen Yuanin didn't even turn around. She only lightly looked at him. Qin Yu sighed inwardly. He lifted a hand and pressed it down. Space violently shook. The tumbling strength forced the several dried corpses back, but it didn't cause any powerful damage to them. The cycle repeated itself. More and more dried corpses surrounded Chinyu, nearly submerging him. Dealing with them became increasingly difficult. Beads of sweat dripped down his forehead. This wasn't a disguise. Controlling his strength while also avoiding an astonishing number of dried corpses was a great challenge for Chinyu. Outside the ruins, the eyes of the rotten corpse turned cold. It roared out loud. Although it had retained some of its consciousness, it couldn't be compared to when it was alive. This boy was its prey, but this pitiful group of lowly people actually dared to steal him. They were seeking death. With the level of a rotten corpse, although it feared the ruins of the city, it didn't affect it too much. With a loud bang, a giant pit formed in the ground. The edges melted away, turning into some sort of crystal. Black energy tumbled within, constantly condensing into ghost faces. Chinyu kept an eye on the movements of the rotten corpses. He was overjoyed. He had fallen into their trap. Like a giant boulder falling from the heavens, dozens of dried corpses were instantly crushed into meat patties. As the black fog touched their flesh and blood, black flames ignited. After several breaths of time, the black flames were extinguished, leaving behind nothing but ashes. The nearly undying and indestructible dried corpses were actually as fragile as ants in front of the rotten corpses. They were easily erased. Roar! The rotten corpse reared its head back and roared. A cruel and vicious aura shot into the skies. Even the bloodshot corpses couldn't help but feel fear. They roared and drew back. Without needing a reminder, Shen Yuanyin stepped forwards. She lifted her hand and spread her fingers. Beneath the dim light, she looked like a pure white snow lotus blooming. Kacha, kacha, on the ground, ice lotuses appeared. They were layered upon each other, their branches and leaves distinct. It seemed as if a gust of wind would cause the flowers to sway. In the next moment, all of the ice lotuses bloomed together. The fragrance of flowers filled the air. The rotten corpse's angry and cruel eyes revealed a trace of confusion. The scene in front of him caused fragmented memories to appear in his mind. All of them were fragmented images that he couldn't clearly see. He tried to grasp them, but all he did was make the fragments dissipate even faster. Anger surged from the bottom of his heart. He glared at Shen Yuanyin and lifted his hand, ready to strike out. But just as he lifted his arm, the rotten corpse froze. Frost appeared on his fingertips and rapidly spread upwards. In the blink of an eye, his entire arm was frozen over. The ice didn't stop there. It continued to climb up his body. A terrifying chill that could extinguish all life penetrated straight into his soul. The rotten corpse's life state had already undergone a mutation. Whether it was his mortal body or soul, he didn't feel much pain. But as he looked at the ice covering his body, the anger in his chest burned even hotter. The stabbing pain in his head caused him to roar out in anger. Bang! All of the ice on the rotten corpse's body instantly shattered. A terrifying aura continued to spread outwards. The ice lotuses that bloomed on the ground violently trembled, covered in cracks. Every crack was like a terrifying mark left behind by a saber, a spear, a sword, or a halberd. All that was beautiful was destroyed, leaving behind only despair and slaughter. Shen Yuanyin took a step back. On the veil covering her face, a mass of blood red appeared and rapidly spread outwards. Her aura suddenly weakened. As Chinyu saw this scene, he was slightly startled. His impression of her changed a little bit. Not to mention anything else, she was at least professional enough. Even though she knew it was fake, she still worked so hard. He could clearly feel that these injuries were real, and they were very heavy. The sublime lost emotion code, attack with full strength, without holding anything back. Qin Yu didn't know this, so he was naturally shaken. Even he, the one who set up the trap, was startled. The dried corpses that had gone mad from Shen Yuanin's provocation fell directly into her trap. The eyes of the dried corpses that had been frightened away by the rotten corpse turned even redder. They cried out like wild dogs trying to protect their food. This damn thing wanted to steal their food. Unforgivable, this was absolutely unforgivable. After breaking through Shen Yuanin's imprisonment, the rotten corpse's ferocious nature erupted. It roared as it strode forwards. But as it took a single step, it was drowned out by the raging corpses that rushed at it from all directions. No matter what you are, if you dare to touch our food, then don't think you'll have a good ending. The plan went surprisingly smoothly. Most of the corpses surrounding Qin Yu dispersed, making it much easier to deal with them. It was all because that woman was ruthless enough, Qin Yu sighed inwardly. As he looked over, his face froze. Shen Yuanin's hand hung down. Dark red beads of blood flowed down her fingertips and dripped onto the ground. The impact just now hadn't caused any visible wounds. Then, this blood, at this time, Shen Yuanin lifted a hand. Without expression, she cut open the wound on her palm once more. Blood flowed out even more freely. She looked up, her eyes indifferent. Qin Yu's face stiffened. After several breaths of silence, he silently cut open his palm. In the air, the tempting smell of blood became increasingly rich. The raging rotten corpses, stimulated by the blood, became increasingly violent. Corpses were sent flying backwards. Very few of them had intact limbs. While they were still in the air, they were wrapped up in black flames and burned to ashes. Perhaps at other times, the threat of death could scare these corpses away. But Shen Yuanin's blood caused them to forget all scruples. The hope of survival was right in front of them. For this, they could disregard everything. Quietly, Shen Yuanin, Qin Yu, and the others escaped from the vortex of slaughter. He confirmed with Undying that his aura was still locked onto. Looking at the rotten corpses that were slaughtering to their heart's content, Qin Yu gnashed his teeth in hatred. This bastard, just how much did he want to eat him? Even at this time, he still hadn't let go. As he was thinking of how to escape, Shen Yuanin's cold voice sounded out, "All of you leave first." The 7 female cultivators shook their heads without hesitation. Lei Fong and the other two's happy expressions froze, their mouths filled with bitterness. Shen Yuanin frowned. This is an order. There was no need to explain it all. It was simple and crude. The 7 female cultivators didn't dare to speak again. They bowed and carefully moved away. Because their 2 main targets hadn't moved, even if the corpses discovered this, they still didn't stop them. As Lei Fong and the other 2 were about to leave, Qin Yu's eyes flashed. The 3 of them cannot leave. If it weren't for Shen Yuanin waiting for an explanation, Lei Fong would have cursed out loud. "Brat, do you want to blow me up?" Qin Yu lightly said, "Whether they are rotten corpses or dried corpses, they aren't without intelligence. If too many people leave, it will arouse suspicion and our plan won't work. So, just in case, these 3 must follow us." Although these words seemed forced, Shen Yuanin didn't argue. She lightly said, "All right." Although these 3 people had some relationship with the immortal sect, they didn't enter her eyes at all. Shen Yuanin didn't care whether they lived or died. Or, it was more accurate to say that she didn't even care about the 7 female cultivators from the immortal sect. This was because she would have a use for them in the future, so she would protect them. Qin Yu glanced at Lei Fong and the other 2. As he saw their hateful gazes, he sneered inwardly. Holding grudges didn't need to be taught. He no longer cared about his surroundings. Qin Yu's eyes drooped as he waited for news from Undying. As long as the lock disappeared, he could immediately leave. Suddenly, the earth beneath their feet trembled. Qin Yu and Shen Yuanyin reacted at nearly the same time. They shot into the skies. Lei Fong and the other two were a moment too slow. By the time they reacted, the ground had already shattered and a terrifying maw was sweeping towards them. Within this circular maw were circles of fine fangs. They crisscrossed with each other, as if it were a meat grinder. A powerful swallowing strength spread out, sucking in all the dirt and stone. Lei Fong felt a chill run down his spine. He suddenly kicked out. The cultivator behind him miserably cried out and tumbled to the ground, falling into the giant maw. Borrowing the strength of this kick, Lei Fong was able to temporarily escape the swallowing strength. His cultivation wildly erupted as he dragged himself away. After surviving a calamity, before he could even relax, a great strength struck his chest. No! Lei Fong screamed out in despair. He looked up and saw Qin Yu take back his foot. Was this retribution? Before he could finish his thoughts, Lei Fong fell into the giant maw and instantly vanished. Qin Yu met Shen Yuanyin's eyes and shrugged. I didn't do it on purpose. This explanation wasn't sincere at all. Shen Yuanyin didn't say anything. Her eyes turned even colder and a cold chill rose up from her body. Of course, Qin Yu didn't care. But deep in his eyes, there was still a bit of worry. As he thought, the sudden appearance of a third party broke the battle between the corpses and corpses. Both sides turned their attention back to the two portions of blood food. In that instant, space froze. Chapter 573. Anyone that dared to snatch food from the jaws of a tiger in front of a group of rotten corpses naturally wasn't an ordinary character. The earth cracked apart and an earthworm creature that was thousands of times larger drilled out. It didn't have a mouth, nose, ears, or eyes. Its mouth was at the end of one end, and its smooth and flexible body was actually covered in a thick layer of armor. The rotten corpse roared and the earth beneath it turned to powder. Its figure instantly vanished and in the next moment appeared in front of the creature, its fist smashing down. There was a deep sound like a mountain shaking and also like the beating of a boundless drum. Where the fist landed, the flesh and blood violently shook, forming ripples that spread outwards. But at this time, the rotten corpse's complexion changed. It tried to pull back its fist, but the armor on the creature's surface suddenly softened like rubber, wrapping around its fist and making it impossible for it to break free. What happened next was beyond everyone's expectations. The part of the creature's body that was hit suddenly opened up, forming a slightly smaller round mouth, and swallowed the rotten corpse into its stomach in one gulp. Undying's voice suddenly sounded out, "Hurry and leave, the lock has disappeared." His voice was a bit nervous. It was clear that his true mood wasn't as calm as he had revealed before. The existence of the rotten corpse also placed a tremendous pressure on him. The more similar an existence was, the more they could understand just how terrifying the other was. The pleasant surprise came so quickly. Qin Yu maintained his composure. He looked at the woman across from him, and for some strange reason, he felt a bit restless. However, this subtle feeling was extinguished in the blink of an eye. Qin Yu cursed himself for being blinded by lust, but he couldn't help but sigh. This really was a world that looked at appearances. At this time, Shen Yuanyin suddenly turned around. Their gazes collided and Qin Yu's face stiffened. Could she have sensed him? There was a slight tremor. Shen Yuanyin was still standing in front of him, but her true body had already left. Outside the ruins, in front of the 7 female cultivators, cold energy rose up and reformed. Without looking back, Shen Yuanyin indifferently said, "Let's go." Whoosh, they rapidly flew far away. After losing their prey, the dried corpses were stunned for a moment before falling into a frenzy. They howled and howled, their blood-red eyes stubbornly staring at Qin Yu. Even though Qin Yu's heart was strong enough, he still felt a chill run down his spine as these blood-red eyes locked onto him. Indeed, a woman's heart was the most poisonous. Just a moment ago, he was still instinctively feeling guilty and uneasy towards her. Who would have thought that in the blink of an eye, he would be completely betrayed? If he didn't have a way to escape, wouldn't he have to stay here and watch helplessly as he was torn to pieces? Looking at Shen Yuanin's fading figure, Qin Yu clenched his teeth. We're leaving too. You want me to die? It's not that easy. Space shattered, forming a black hole. It was like a great maw that swallowed Qin Yu. Shua, his aura completely dissipated. The berserk corpses stopped their advance and stared at each other in shock. What was going on? In the blink of an eye, the 2 portions of food ran clean. If you have this ability, why didn't you use it earlier? Are you kidding us? Thus, he became even more furious. The creature that had swallowed the rotting corpse suddenly howled in pain. Its enormous body thrashed wildly on the ground, causing the heavens to collapse and the earth to crack. Flesh and blood disintegrated. A giant hole was torn open in its body and the rotting corpse leapt down. The creature behind it froze and fell backwards. Then, all of its flesh and blood rapidly withered away. In a breath of time, only a thin layer of skin was left over as it was swept away by the wind. The rotting corpse's withered hair fluttered in the wind. It stared at the place where Qin Yu disappeared and punched out its fist. Space shattered, forming a black hole. Just as it was about to drill into it, the newly formed hole violently trembled and then completely collapsed. The rotting corpse angrily roared. But the last bit of aura it had locked onto had already been destroyed. It had lost its prey. Turning around, the rotting corpse rushed towards the group of corpses. A terrifying aura erupted. Faint traces of black fog drilled out from the void, condensing in the skies above the ruins. Time slowly passed. The movements in the ruins became smaller and smaller. The panic-stricken cries of the corpses became weak and fragmented. As for the black fog in the skies above the ruins, it became more and more numerous, gradually condensing into thick clouds. The rotting corpse walked out from the ruins of the city. It lifted a hand and pointed towards the skies. The thick black fog emitted a loud explosion and black rain began to fall down. Although they were raindrops, as they fell into the ruins they directly turned into flames. The black flames leapt and wildly spread, burning everything to ashes. Ah! Cries of pain, despair, and fear echoed out from the ruins. These were the corpses that were reforming. Their nearly undying and indestructible bodies were like oiled straws in front of the black flames. They had bitterly waited for endless years, withstanding endless torment. But in the end, they didn't manage to wait until the day they were revived. Like this, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, turning into ashes between the heavens and earth, without a single trace left behind. When the black fog scattered and the black flames were extinguished, the ruins of the city had disappeared. All that was left behind was a massive pit in the ground. The edges of the pit had melted into crystals and black energy surged within. From time to time, pained faces would appear. They faced the gray skies, their mouths opening and closing as if they were roaring and questioning something. The rotting corpse stood at the edge of the pit. Its gaze fell into the distance, incomparably deep, as if it could pierce through the boundaries of space and time. Little thing, no matter where you flee to, I will find you. The withered branches of earth demon thistles absorbed infernal energy to grow. They were incomparably hard and the sharp thorns that covered the branches contained a potent poison. They could also release an invisible infernal heart that bewildered the mind. In addition, earth demon thistles were vegetation that grew in groups. Once they wove together, even the powerful monster beasts and evil beings of the Sea of Purgatory wouldn't be willing to enter. This thistle forest in front of them stretched out as far as the eye could see. It had grown for at least tens of thousands of years or even longer. Occasionally, in the gaps between the thistles, one could see some pale white skeletons. These were the remains of powerful life forms that had mistakenly entered here many years ago. This was because the weaker ones had already been cleanly absorbed and fused with the black earth. At this time, in the skies above this thistle forest that could be called a forbidden zone, space suddenly shattered and a figure flew out. The black-robed, black-haired man was Chinyu. His sharp eyes swept around. He didn't find any dangers, but as he looked at the thistle forest that stretched out as far as the eye could see, he revealed a happy expression. The potent poison and terrifying infernal heart had no effect on him. Rather, they were a natural barrier. Thus, to others, this thistle forest could be called a dangerous place, but to Chinyu, it was actually the best place to rest. He flicked his sleeves and wiped away the thistles, completely disregarding the poisonous gas that was released when the branches were broken. Then, he sat down and took out some pills. When that little girl attacked him just now, she had broken his recovery. Even now, his leg bones were aching and the damage to his body was still ongoing. He swallowed the pills into his stomach. As he felt a warm feeling rapidly spreading through his chest, Chinyu smiled. With his status as the demonic path saint's son, he naturally obtained the best supply of pills. After these demonic path pills were purified by the little blue lamp, their efficacy had become even more amazing. In at most a day, he would be able to restore himself to his peak condition. Without warning, Chinyu's eyes shot open. His heart raced and beads of sweat dripped down his forehead. In that moment, he felt as if he had been locked onto by a vicious beast in the darkness. He could even smell the stench of its sharp teeth. When he sensed again, everything had calmed down. But Chinyu knew that he wouldn't have such a feeling for no reason. It seemed to represent some sort of omen, rotten corpse. A thought jumped out in Chinyu's mind. Perhaps in the future, he would meet this person again. His face was cloudy and uncertain. After a long time, he took a deep breath and suppressed his tumbling thoughts. Chinyu was expressionless. His eyes were like a calm lake, icy cold. So what if they met again? Today he wasn't a match for this person and could only flee in distress. But, who knew what would happen in the future? Perhaps on the day they met again, their identities as the hunter and the hunted might have swapped places. Thinking of this, Chinyu no longer felt any fear. He closed his eyes and calmed his mind. He began to catalyze and absorb the medicinal efficacy with all his might. Time quietly passed. In the blink of an eye, a day passed. Shua, Chinyu's eyes flashed open, a sharp light flashing within them. He stood up and his bones began to crackle. A powerful strength surged through his flesh and blood. Adversity could truly stimulate one's potential. Although Chinyu hadn't cultivated yet, whether it was his cultivation or mortal body, both had risen to a certain degree. Although the Earth Slaughter Thistles forest was safe, it wasn't a place to stay for long. After being chased by the rotten corpse, Chinyu's desire to become stronger had risen. As for the Sea of Purgatory's water demon, he had to obtain it. However, without the help of Wei Jia and the others, the difficulty of this matter had greatly increased. He needed to carefully plan and look for other opportunities. He looked down at the black armor he wore. Thinking for a moment, Chinyu's thoughts stirred and the armor vanished from sight. It was originally formed from the little saint robe, but now it had turned into simple black clothes. Of course, Chinyu didn't forget to change his appearance. The new demonic path saint's son, without accident, any influence within the land of divinity and demons with some foundation would have already obtained information on his identity. His identity as a true demon guard was a good concealment when he was with Wei Jia and the others. But if he moved alone, it would be a bit more conspicuous. After finishing this, Qin Yu stepped forwards and shot into the skies. After determining the direction, he soared deep into the sea of purgatory. After being chased by the rotten corpse, perhaps Qin Yu's bad luck had been temporarily exhausted. For the next 2 days, it was a rare tranquility. It was like all of the terrifying life forms of the Sea of Purgatory had vanished without a trace. Although he didn't know the reason, Qin Yu didn't waste this chance. He didn't rest at all. For 2 days, he rushed forwards at full speed, passing through a vast region. During this time, he encountered several waves of cultivators. Luckily, because of the cosmic Seacross bell, Qin Yu discovered them early on and avoided them without revealing his tracks. The so-called depths of the Sea of Purgatory didn't have a clear division. Because the life forms within were terrifyingly strong, it was called a forbidden land. Qin Yu carefully looked over the map and determined that he had arrived at the edge of the forbidden land. After a moment, he would be able to enter. However, that water demon was extremely tyrannical and lived in the depths of the forbidden land. He estimated that he would need at least 2 or 3 more days to reach it. Suddenly, his entire body felt cold and gloomy, as if he had entered a world of ice and snow. Qin Yu came to a sudden stop. When he turned around, all he could see was a vast expanse of gray. He couldn't see the path he came from at all. His complexion sank, but he didn't panic. These 2 days of tranquility hadn't made him forget that he was in the extremely dangerous Sea of Purgatory. It seemed that he had used up all of his good luck. He bitterly smiled. After a moment of hesitation, Qin Yu flicked his sleeves and a half-buried stone hauled out from the ground, crashing into the endless gray fog. In an instant, the stone submerged into the fog. Without any further movement, it vanished from sight. Qin Yu frowned. As he was thinking, he heard the sound of breaking air. Several cultivators were rapidly flying towards him. "Fellow Daoist, do not touch the fog," the person in the lead cried out. Qin Yu turned and looked at them. Shua, the group of 4 landed on the ground. As they saw Qin Yu was unharmed, they all revealed relaxed expressions. The cultivator in the lead was a middle-aged man with white sideburns. He didn't approach, instead standing several steps away. "Greetings, fellow Daoist. We are the same as you, cultivators that have been trapped here." Qin Yu swept his eyes over these people, not speaking for a moment. The person smiled. "I understand. It's normal for fellow Daoist to have some scruples. Let me explain to fellow Daoist first. The fog behind you is called the Yellow Springs." "Yellow Springs." Undying's voice sounded out, his tone especially dignified. After several breaths of time, he said, "These people aren't wrong. This is indeed the Yellow Springs." In the next moment, information about this fog appeared in Qin Yu's mind. The Yellow Springs fog was also known as the fog of disorientation. Any object that touched it, whether it was a living being or not, would be instantly sucked in. As for where these objects went, no one knew. This was because up until now, no living being that was sucked into the fog had ever returned alive. It was because of this that this fog was named the Yellow Springs. Entering it was the same as stepping into the Yellow Springs, all life would be extinguished. Sensing Qin Yu's dignified expression, the middle-aged cultivator said, "It seems fellow Daoist is experienced and knowledgeable enough to know just how fierce the Yellow Springs fog is. Then, there is no need for me to explain any further." His expression was solemn. "We arrived here earlier than fellow Daoist and have already investigated how this place was formed. I wonder if fellow Daoist would be willing to return to the camp with us so that we can discuss how to escape." Qin Yu couldn't refuse this proposal. He nodded. If so, then I'll have to trouble you all. The several people revealed smiles. Fellow Taoist will soon understand. Only by joining forces will we have a chance of survival. Helping you is the same as helping ourselves, so there is no need to have scruples. As they spoke, the several people led the way. Qin Yu kept a distance behind them. The middle-aged cultivator and the others weren't dissatisfied with Qin Yu's cautiousness. If they were in his shoes, they would have done the same. The journey was silent. Luckily, the camp wasn't too far away and they soon arrived. Although it was called a camp, it was actually just a series of simple stone houses. Seeing the several people return, everyone in the camp came out to welcome them. Sweeping his eyes over them, there were around a dozen people, none of them weak. Qin Yu wasn't surprised by this. Those that had the courage to smoothly arrive at the edge of the forbidden land definitely weren't ordinary people. But, what he didn't expect was that the leader of this clearly hastily built group was actually a beautiful young woman. No, simply beautiful wasn't enough to describe her. It would be more accurate to say that she was elegant and graceful. Every movement she made was clear, it was clear that her status wasn't ordinary. She was the last to come out. She seemed to be handling something. Her cheeks were pale and her smile was sincere and kind. Everyone greeted her, their indifferent expressions fading a bit. It seemed that she was quite popular. My name is Sang Zhu. I will temporarily lead everyone to break through our current predicament. I welcome you to join us. These words revealed her identity. Beneath everyone's eyes, Qin Yu's heart stirred. Sang Zhu's expression was friendly and her voice was calm and natural. But, he couldn't help but have some other thoughts. This woman seemed to place great importance on being the leader. Why was that? People were like this. Once they had a thought, they would carefully examine it. Looking at the warm smile on Sang Zhu's face, Qin Yu became a bit more cautious. Fellow Taoist Sang Zhu, how do you do? My name is Xuanfeng. It was clearly a fake name. Sang Zhu was startled. Her eyes flashed and she smiled. Fellow Taoist Xuanfeng, how do you do? Because there are constantly fellow Taoists that accidentally stumble into this place, I specially made a jade slip with detailed explanations. If you don't understand anything, just tell me. After carefully sensing the jade slip and determining that there was nothing wrong with it, Qin Yu thanked her and probed it with his divine sense. A moment later, he opened his eyes, his complexion dignified. His luck had really run out. After conversing with Undying for several moments and determining that there wasn't any lie in the jade slip, Qin Yu took a deep breath and said, I'll leave everything to fellow Taoist Sang Zhu. Chapter 574. The simple and crude campsite and the dusky sky were filled with a sense of desolation. Qin Yu stood in front of the house, looking at the corpse covered in white cloth as well as Sang Zhu's sorrowful expression. He couldn't help but doubt his own judgment. Was he thinking too much? Secretly shaking his head, he suppressed his tumbling emotions. Regardless of whether this woman was as he thought, he shouldn't be careless. Sang Zhu looked up, revealing her slightly red eyes. Everyone, fellow Taoist Zhang Xian's wounds are too heavy to be treated. But, he died to help everyone escape. I will bring his corpse out of the sea of purgatory and return it to his family. These are fellow Taoist Zhang's belongings. In accordance with his final wishes, I will hand them over to the person he designated. Now, please check the records. Sang Zhu swears that she will absolutely complete Zhang Xian's task. Everyone was instantly moved. After entering the sea of purgatory, no matter who it was, there was no guarantee they could escape unscathed. In other words, since everyone had come here, they were prepared to be buried here. He could not help but think, what if the person who died today was me? Will someone help me collect my corpse and return my belongings? Regardless of whether or not everyone thought that Sang Zhu's actions were to win over the hearts of the people, all of their faces were moved. All right, I'll be the witness. This is a dangerous place. Who knows what the road ahead will be like? If I am unlucky and meet with misfortune, I will leave it to you all. I hope that in the future, I will be able to personally witness Her Highness Sang Zhu delivering her belongings. He addressed Sang Zhu as Your Highness because Sang Zhu was a princess of the Qi Kingdom. Because of this, when she spoke up in front of everyone, people would believe her. Although the princess of the Qi Kingdom wasn't qualified to inherit the throne, her status was still incomparably noble. If he went back on his word, the entire Qi Empire's sovereign clan would be humiliated. Naturally, his credibility would be extremely high. Sang Zhu solemnly said, I will not disappoint you all. Her eyes swept around. I have already calculated that the strength of the array formation will weaken tomorrow. The key to life and death lies in this gamble. Everyone's eyes lit up. They were slightly uneasy, but more than that, they were yearning. No one is willing to welcome the arrival of death, but sometimes the dawn you see, can it really illuminate yourself? That might not be the case. At almost the same time, the rotten corpse that was following its instincts and walking through the sea of purgatory suddenly stopped, its eyes shining as it stared at the ground. He seemed to penetrate the barrier of the earth. His gaze fell into the depths of the earth. His breathing became rapid, and his body began to tremble. This aura, there was no mistaking it, it was it. The decayed corpse's thoughts were in chaos. He didn't know what he was thinking, but he knew that it was what he longed to obtain. In fact, the reason why he had fallen to such a state was because of it. The zombie let out a low roar, and black flames ignited around its body. It was so terrifying that it could even burn the ground. His figure sank into the ground bit by bit and disappeared in the blink of an eye. The next day, in the camp, Sang Zhu explained everything in detail, including the key points of breaking the array. She asked carefully to make sure everyone understood, then said, Let's go. The Yellow Springs fog covered a large area. Perhaps it was the influence of the invisible baleful aura that caused the life inside to be extinguished. Along the way, Qin didn't see any vegetation or life. There was only a deathly silence. However, the further he went, the more pressure he felt in his heart. Even the deathly stillness in the surroundings had gained some sinister aura. This feeling was like a collapsing mountain. Although it wasn't strong, it was still extremely terrifying. Qin furrowed his eyebrows. He glanced at Sang Zhu, who was leading the way. His eyes flashed and he slowed down several steps, falling behind the several people in the group. A moment later, a mountain valley appeared in front of them. To their surprise, this mountain valley actually had 4 entrances, and they all looked exactly the same. Sang Zhu stopped. The restless people behind her all revealed happy expressions. There were only 4 paths. She let out a deep breath and said, It looks like my calculations were correct. Time is pressing. Let's split up and proceed according to the plan. The group divided into 4. Qin was in the 3rd position on the left. Sang Zhu swept her eyes around and then headed straight for the group. I'll go with you. The several people beside her all revealed happy expressions. Although they had some confidence they could break through the array formation and leave the Yellow Springs fog today, no one could be sure whether or not they would succeed. But whether it would succeed or not, no one dared to be sure. Walking together with Sang Zhu, there was no doubt that it would be safer. And this point had already been confirmed during the last test. Qin maintained his composure. A bit of caution rose in his heart. Even if Sang Zhu's performance was normal, he still chose to believe in his own intuition. Although the other cultivators were unwilling, they knew they couldn't force it. They all nodded and said goodbye to each other before quickly walking into the channel. Unexpectedly, this channel wasn't long. After a dozen or so steps, they arrived at the depths of the mountain valley. Unlike the deathly stillness outside, the mountain valley in front of them was actually filled with life. Green grass and flowers bloomed everywhere. Qin Yu was startled. At this time, Undying shouted out in his mind, "Wake up!" His eyes blurred. When they cleared up once more, there was no longer any life in front of him. All he could see was black gas. It tumbled about like a pure black fog, without any aura leaking out. But as Qin Yu looked at it, his pupils instinctively shrank. This feeling was as if he had encountered a natural predator. Or to be more precise, it was something extremely terrifying. He didn't know what this black gas was, but he knew that if he fell into it without any precautions, his fate would be miserable. Besides him, Seng Zhu and the others all had dazed expressions. They looked ahead in a daze as they walked forward step by step. "Hide well. Don't worry about them." Undying's voice continued to ring out. Qin Yu wasn't a good person. Since Undying reminded him, there had to be a reason. He maintained the same rhythm as everyone else. Because he was at the back, he could see everyone's movements. They approached the black fog. As Sang Zhu stood at the front, she was about to step into the black fog, but there still wasn't any abnormality. After several steps, Sang Zhu was the first to enter the black fog, followed by several others. As Qin Yu hesitated, Undying continued to say, "Master, there is no need to worry. Just follow." Although Undying could be trusted, when Qin Yu stepped into the black fog he still felt a chill crawl up his back. But something terrifying didn't happen. An invisible strength separated him from the black fog outside. Qin Yu's eyebrows shot up, surprise on his face. This was because this strength was the power of an array formation. Since when did Undying possess such a high-level ability to form an array formation from the void? Or had he been hiding it all this time? As if guessing Qin Yu's confusion, Undying said, "This is not my strength, but the strength of the Endless Sea's great array formation spirit." Qin Yu's eyes widened. He immediately thought back to when he rushed into the road of sea burial and the terrifying ambush he encountered at the end. Wasn't it said that the Endless Sea's array formation spirit had been destroyed? Undying said, "His consciousness has already been annihilated, leaving behind only pure strength. This matter is complex. If Master is interested, I will tell you in the future." Qin Yu nodded. He thought to himself, what do we do now? Undying smiled. If there isn't an accident, all you need to do is wait. Someone will naturally send you away. The taunting tone in his words was undisguised. Mountain Valley, outside the black fog. Sang Zhu's figure appeared out of thin air. She stared at the tumbling black fog, her usually gentle eyes now filled with callousness. It was just that there was now a bit of hesitation in her eyes. That cautious Xuanfeng had been dealt with so easily. She thought there would be some trouble. Chapter 575. Another entrance to the mountain valley. The passage was unexpectedly long. After walking for a long time, several people still couldn't see the end. Luckily, they remembered Sang Zhu's arrangements and were cautious, so no accidents occurred. "Brother Su, is there something wrong?" a person in the group asked. The others all revealed concerned expressions. They didn't completely trust Sang Zhu, but they were forced by the situation. The cultivator surnamed Su had studied a great deal of array formations. He thought for a moment and said, "I won't hide it from you all. This great array formed from the Yellow Springs fog contains the cycle of yin and yang in the world. I can only see a few parts of it, but from what I can see, there shouldn't be any problems." Everyone's expressions relaxed. In truth, they already knew this, but hearing the cultivator surnamed Su say it again gave them some psychological comfort. At this time, there was a loud explosion above their heads, like a thunderclap in broad daylight. The scene in front of them suddenly distorted. The cultivator surnamed Su shouted out, "This is bad, this passage is about to close. We must retreat." Everyone turned around and fled for their lives, but it was already too late. The shattered space swallowed them in one gulp. In the third passage, the ground dissolved, turning into tumbling crimson liquid. Faint strands rose up. Although they seemed small and weak, they were actually terrifyingly tenacious. They were like some sort of well-developed root system. No matter how the cultivators desperately resisted, they still stubbornly and tenaciously crawled over their bodies. Then, it forcefully contracted, pulling these cultivators into the crimson liquid. With a burst of bubbles, they completely vanished from sight. The fourth passage. A group of people were trapped in the fog, their faces filled with fear. Luckily, as long as they didn't move, the black fog would remain still. Although there wasn't any immediate danger, the fear of the unknown still left them tormented. Not too far away from them, Sangju's face appeared in the black fog. Her icy cold eyes fell on the group of people before fading away. From beginning to end, these people didn't discover Sangju's arrival, nor did they know that they had just brushed shoulders with death. Of course, the reason she let them go wasn't because she was soft-hearted. Sangju wasn't certain that the sacrifices she prepared would be able to achieve her goal without fail. Leaving them behind was just bait. If the sacrifices weren't enough, she could use these people to attract more cultivators. Deep within the mountain valley, shrouded in endless black fog, there was a blood-red cocoon that constantly beat like a heart. Countless blood threads drilled out of its surface, intertwining with each other to form tentacles. At the end of each tentacle was a translucent bubble, within which was a cultivator. If one were to sense carefully, they would discover that the life auras of the cultivators in the bubbles were slowly weakening. That was because all of their life force was being continuously plundered and sent into the blood-colored cocoon. Suddenly, the black fog roiled and Sangju stepped out. Her eyes indifferently swept over the scene in front of her, and she lightly stepped forward. In the next moment, a vortex appeared on the ground, from which emerged the unconscious cultivators from the 3 tunnels. The blood-colored cocoon's pulsation rate suddenly increased, as though it was extremely excited. In the next moment, even more blood vessels emerged, intertwining with each other as they extended outwards, dragging the cultivators away. Those strands of blood drilled into their scalps. The unconscious cultivators' bodies twitched and then fell silent. Then, the transparent bubble slowly opened and completely enveloped them. Sangju's complexion slightly changed and her eyes turned bone-chilling cold. Because they were missing one person. Sun Feng. She took a deep breath and suppressed her tumbling emotions. She closed her eyes, and the quiet black fog around her suddenly began to tumble. Rumble, the momentum was vast and mighty, like a roaring sea. Unfortunately, all of this was in vain. Within the tumbling black fog that resembled boiling water, Qinyu was like a shadow, completely unaffected. Looking up, he could clearly see Sangju's increasingly gloomy complexion. Undying, she's already suspicious. Even if she had a plan, hiding in the dark was the best. Once she was discovered, the effects would be greatly reduced. Undying lightly said, "Master, there is no need to worry. With things having come to this point, she has no other choice. You will understand once you continue watching." Shua, Sangju opened her eyes, anger burning in her heart. Because this matter concerned her future, she had been careful enough, but she never imagined that at this critical moment, she would make such a big mistake. A living person had actually disappeared. Within her sleeves, Sangju's pale fingers clenched into fists. Her eyes drooped as her thoughts raced. After a long time, she let out a long breath, her eyes cold and sharp. No one could escape here. Even if she couldn't find them now, once she resurrected the evil spirit and refined it into her body, she would be able to see everything. As for whether or not Xuanfeng would cause trouble, Sang Zhu's eyes were icy cold. If he jumped out, that would be for the best. Since she had decided to do such a dangerous thing, she had made full preparations. Even if it was a calamity immortal realm existence, she wouldn't fear them. Humph. With a sneer, Sang Zhu said in a soft voice, "You little rat running for your life, just wait for me. I will definitely catch you." She lifted a hand and pointed a finger. The blood-red cocoon trembled. In the next moment, it contracted and expanded, its beating rate rising by several times. Bang, bang, in the deathly silence, this sound was particularly clear, as if it came from a real heart. The blood tendrils connected to the air bubble suddenly rose up, pulling the cultivators wrapped in the air bubble into the air. These unconscious cultivators violently trembled within the air bubble. Their complexions rapidly paled and their life auras wildly flowed out like a broken dam. Sang Zhu's eyes burned with a burning heat. She stared at the scene in front of her, her chest heaving up and down. From the day she was born, she had been unwilling to accept her fate. Why couldn't she inherit the throne even though they both had the imperial bloodline? Was it because she was a woman? How unfair was this? She wanted to resist. Ever since she was a child, she wanted to be strong and do her best in everything she did. But no one cared about her. Even if they praised her, it was just a light and fleeting word that was quickly forgotten. Sang Zhu was angry, she resented, she struggled, but she didn't have the qualifications to resist. She could only gradually sink into depression. But just as she was about to accept her fate, the heavens had given her an unexpected chance. As long as she could accomplish this, she would truly have the strength to cause the entire imperial bloodline to turn their heads. This was Sang Zhu's final chance. Whether it was for herself or for the woman she intimately called mother when she was a child, the woman who had been beaten to death. She had to succeed. Even if she had to pay a heavy price, even if she had to stain her hands with blood. Sang Zhu stood up straight. Her breathing gradually steadied. She didn't regret it nor did she feel any guilt. In this world, the weak were prey to the strong. These people had died under her hands, so this was their fate. No one could stop her, if there was, she would just kill them. Chapter 576 /P. Undying was silent for a moment. He asked, "Does Master know what this blood cocoon is?" The Yellow Springs fog is not naturally formed by the heavens and earth, but is caused by the dissipation of a vicious being's aura. This vicious being is called a hell evil spirit. Since ancient times, there have been rumors that there is a mysterious domain between the heavens and earth where the souls of living beings return to after they die. This is the Yellow Springs of Hell. The so-called evil spirit is only a title. Master, you can view it as a special life form born from hell. It has the ability to control 100 ghosts and command a ghost army. The Yellow Springs of Hell truly exist. Master, although I don't know why this blood cocoon would appear here, if I'm not wrong, then it is the evil spirit embryo. Undying paused, giving him time to consider. In my plan, Master has a high chance of seizing this evil spirit embryo today. Once you can refine and tame it, you will obtain the power to control 100 ghosts. Master can only resist ordinary tribulation immortals right now, but if you can obtain the help of 100 ghosts, your strength will multiply. Qing Yu's heart shook. He never imagined that this blood cocoon would have such an origin. Since Undying spoke, it wasn't baseless. He must be confident in his plan. With his current cultivation, every step forward had become extraordinarily difficult. Multiply his strength, the opportunity was right in front of him. The temptation was truly astonishing. Moreover, he didn't need to do much. He only needed to quietly watch from the sidelines. If he said his heart wasn't moved, he would be deceiving himself. But, his eyes flashed and he slowly shook his head, his expression firm. Undying said, "This is a heaven-sent opportunity. Master needs to carefully consider it. Is it worth it?" With a decision made, his heart calmed down. Qin Yu lightly said, "In this world, there are always many things one cannot do. But, one should still hold on to the most basic bottom line. If he were to stand idly by today, he would feel guilty for the rest of his life." Perhaps it really wasn't worth it, but it was precisely because of this that they could be called people. Otherwise, how would they be any different from wild beasts? Undying sighed. "I hope that Master won't regret this in the future." His tone was a bit helpless, but there was also a bit of gratification hidden within. At this time, within his soul space, the cosmic sea-cross bell and the hanging purple moon, as well as the blue sun phantom in his Dantian sea, all of their energies seemed to slow down. It wasn't just Undying alone who was touched by this. Perhaps from this day onwards, the several guests within his body had established true trust with Qin Yu. Between the gains and losses, it was hard to say for some time. It was just that Qin Yu didn't know this yet. Undying's voice returned to tranquility. "If Master wishes to save her, then the plan must change. I must make some preparations. That woman Sang Zhu should be prepared, so Master must be a bit more cautious." Qin Yu nodded. After entering the Sea of Purgatory, he had been a bit distressed. This wasn't because he was weak, but because the Sea of Purgatory was far too terrifying. In terms of cultivation, someone that could fight with an early calamity immortal was absolutely at the peak of all the cultivators that entered the Sea of Purgatory. What's more, he had many trump cards in his hands, so he wasn't afraid of Sang Zhu. This wasn't arrogance, but rather the self-confidence he had gained after going through many trials and tribulations. Feng Yunyun felt as if she had fallen into a swamp. She was surrounded by pitch-black mud, and a terrifying pressure came from all directions. His chest felt heavy, and the bones in his body creaked. It felt as if his entire body was about to be crushed. Vaguely, she knew that she was not in the right state. She struggled to wake up, but her eyelids felt as if they weighed 1,000 pounds. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't open them. Her body grew colder and colder. The consciousness that she was barely able to gather began to show signs of dissipating. She didn't know what was happening to her, but she instinctively felt fear. It was as if as long as she fell asleep, she would never wake up again. "I can't sleep. Wake up. Hurry and wake up." She screamed in her heart, but it was useless. Her consciousness became increasingly muddled. Suddenly, a loud sound entered her ears. It was like thunder in the skies, rumbling straight into the deepest depths of her heart. The oppressive pressure around her suddenly dissipated. She subconsciously gasped for breath, and it was only then that Feng Yunyun discovered that she had woken up. Her body was sore and weak. Her joints ached, and she couldn't summon the least bit of strength. A layer of sticky film stuck to her body. Feng Yunyun moved her body and discovered that there was a strange object above her head. She reached out with difficulty and grabbed it. As she pulled, she felt an intense pain. This strange object had drilled into her body, and now it was wriggling as if it wanted to drill further into her body. She was horrified. She didn't care about the heart-wrenching pain. Feng Yunyun didn't know where she found the strength to pull that strange object down. As it fell in front of her eyes, she saw that it was a mass of blood vessels that wriggled in her hand, quickly drying up. What was going on? In her memories, she had clearly been with Su Wenzi just now. Before she could think further, a shrill scream entered her ears. It was like an arrow piercing through her mind. Feng Yunyan's mind buzzed and she fainted. The black fog rapidly retreated. The Yellow Springs fog that blocked off the surrounding world began to converge like a tide, submerging into the blood cocoon. It howled far away, its speed faster than lightning. In the blink of an eye, it vanished from sight without giving anyone time to react. As he felt the resentment that came from that scream just now, he stiffened. In his heart, Undying was both shocked and angry. That evil spirit woke up long ago. While he was ashamed, he also rejoiced. Luckily, Qinyu had decided to save her. If he had followed his plan and waited for this evil spirit to finish growing, the consequences would have been inconceivable. Sang Zhu looked in the direction that the blood cocoon vanished, her mind blanking out for a brief moment. She had worked hard for all these years, paid a great price for this day, even sacrificed her innocence and blocked off all paths of retreat. But in the end, this was the result. She had used a wicker basket to draw water for nothing. At this moment, she truly understood the bitterness in those words. Then, from the depths of her heart, all of the anger, resentment, and despair that surged out turned icy cold. Sang Zhu looked up. She stubbornly stared at Qinyu, who appeared after the black fog dissipated. Her voice seemed to come from the 9 nether realms. I will draw out your soul and refine it. In her opinion, it was Qinyu's sudden attack that had awakened the evil spirit that hadn't fully grown yet, causing all of her efforts to fail. She lifted a hand. A bell appeared in Sang Zhu's hand. It was the color of black jade and its surface was slightly translucent. With a shake of her wrist, the bell rang out. The rapid syllables stirred up some kind of aura between the heavens and earth. Black arrows condensed in the air. Their number was like a torrential rain that flooded every inch of space. Whoosh, whoosh, as the arrows fell, they whistled through the air. Qinyu lifted a hand and thrust forward. Layers of deep blue water light erupted, forming a vast and mighty momentum that turned into the phantom of a vast sea. Countless black arrows shot into the water light. Then, like frost beneath the blazing sun, they melted away. Although there were countless arrows and they caused violent vibrations in the sea phantom, they weren't able to break through it. Qinyu held a hand in front of him, blocking the arrows that filled the skies. At this moment, the formidable power of the Path of Water was fully revealed. Although it hadn't reached large success, in terms of defensive power, it wasn't any weaker than that of an ordinary calamity immortal. Sang Zhu clenched her teeth, her eyes becoming increasingly cold. No wonder he had dared to ruin her plans, he really did have some methods. At this time, she couldn't help but feel regret. She had already realized that Xuanfeng wasn't someone easy to deal with. If she had been more cautious, she might have been able to avoid today's outcome. But the more she regretted, the angrier she became. Sang Zhu opened her mouth and spat out a bead. This bead was pitch black, and as soon as it appeared, the surrounding temperature began to rapidly fall. There was naturally a reason why she knew about the evil spirit. Her innate body was the greatest reason she had the confidence to refine the evil spirit. Now that the evil spirit had fled, all of her preparations had failed. The only thing she wanted to do now was to kill the Qinyu who ruined her plans. She didn't hesitate to pay any price. This bead seemed ordinary and only possessed the ice attribute. But, Sang Zhu had spent a great deal of time and effort to condense it from the coldine energy of the world. Hesitation flashed in her eyes before turning into determination. Sang Zhu lifted a hand and the bead loudly shattered. Poof! A black light shot out. It was like an illusory shadow, completely unhindered. In the blink of an eye, it pierced through the deep blue water light and drilled into Qinyu's body from between his eyebrows. But the cruel and fierce expression on her face only lasted for a breath of time before it turned to panic and fear. Because there wasn't anything wrong with Qinyu, it was like the black light that drilled into his forehead was really just a shadow, or perhaps, he himself was a black hole that could erase any heretic that invaded his body. But no matter what the true reason was, it represented an extremely terrifying strength. Sang Zhu paled and a look of panic appeared in her vicious eyes. She turned and left. Using some unknown method, her figure suddenly split into three, each with a similar aura as they rapidly fled in different directions. The rain of black arrows dissipated. Qin Yu drew back his hand and the water light faded away. As he looked at Sang Zhu's three fleeing figures, his eyes were ice cold. This woman had an extraordinary status and her personality was ruthless and cruel. Since the two of them had an irreconcilable enmity, he couldn't let her go. Although the three figures had similar auras, their souls wouldn't lie. Through the cosmic Sea-Cross spell, Qin Yu could directly lock onto her true body. He lifted his right hand and bent his index finger like he was pulling a bowstring. Silver-white light rapidly gathered, releasing a terrifying aura. It was like 1,000 mountains and 10,000 rivers could be cut apart. Qin Yu let go. The silver-white light hauled forwards at an unimaginable speed. Sang Zhu could feel a terrifying aura rapidly approaching from behind her. She wanted to dodge, but her heart turned cold. This was because she discovered that this strike had locked onto her aura. She couldn't avoid it. Although she was strong, the disparity between her and Qin Yu's strength was too great. The path of metal that was filled with killing intent was more than enough to kill her. Moreover, this path of metal was stimulated by a portion of the Great Tao. It directly touched upon the rules of the world, so its might was even more terrifying. Ah! Sang Zhu screamed. She crazily stimulated her protective strength and layers of light covered her. But beneath the path of metal, all of this was like a bubble, bursting apart with a single touch. She couldn't block it at all. Just as Sang Zhu was about to die here, the air suddenly condensed and a layer of frost appeared on the surface of the silver-white light. Because the color was similar, it wasn't too conspicuous at first. Then, an icy cold aura erupted, sealing the entire silver-white light in ice. Kacha, the layer of ice shattered. The killing strike of the path of metal dispersed with it. Escaping from death, Sang Zhu paled. She only stared blankly at the figure that appeared in front of her. A thin veil covered her appearance, but even so, one could still taste a certain unrivaled elegance from her body. She was stunned. At this moment, jealousy instinctively rose in Sang Zhu's heart. But, she immediately woke up and lowered her head to hide her emotions. Who was this woman? She was even more dignified than the dignified princess of an empire. Qin Yu had already recognized that the one who had intervened was the veiled female cultivator he had worked with in the city ruins. As he thought about how just as he felt guilty, she had cleanly left. Qin Yu's complexion darkened. Of course, he would never admit that his current expression was to cover up his embarrassment. Thinking about it, he really didn't know what he was doing back then. Shen Yuanyin looked at the man in front of her and frowned. Her icy but pleasant voice echoed out, "It's you." Qin Yu's killing intent was boiling and his aura erupted. He naturally couldn't hide it any longer. "We meet again." Looking around from the corner of his eyes, he could see that the female cultivators that followed behind her had all disappeared. It seemed that this woman had encountered some trouble these past days. He carefully sensed her. Although it was blurry, beneath her strong appearance, there seemed to be a bit of weakness hidden within. Hearing Qin Yu's calm voice, Shen Yuanin's calm heart began to ripple. She quietly revolved her cultivation method, loathing rising in her heart. "I must protect this woman." Her voice became even colder, as if a single disagreement would erupt. Qin Yu frowned. "Do you know what she did?" Shen Yuanin coldly said, "I don't know and I don't want to know." The sublime lost emotion code left behind awe towards death. The only emotion that could be called recognition of the immortal sect. As the master of Nine Heaven Mirror Moon Palace, she couldn't allow a direct disciple of the immortal sect to die in front of her. When Sang Zhu was on the verge of death, she had hastily activated her defenses. One of them was the power of the immortal token. Otherwise, with Shen Yuanin's current condition, why would she save her? As Qin Yu heard this, his intentions of explaining disappeared. He looked deeply at her and said, "As you wish." He turned and left. He wasn't blinded by lust, but this veiled female cultivator was unfathomably deep in his eyes. Her strength was tyrannical. If he insisted on killing Sang Zhu and came into conflict with her, he feared both sides would be wounded. Carrying the unconscious Feng Yunyun, Qin Yu shot into the skies and soon vanished from sight. Looking at the two people leave, ripples appeared in Shen Yuanin's heart once more. Why was this person always able to disturb her mind? Just as these questions rose in her mind, they were immediately suppressed. Sublime lost emotion code, she didn't want to waste time on trivial matters. That's right, in Shen Yuanin's eyes, the current Qin Yu was someone she could ignore. She turned and coldly said, "Who are you? Why do you have an immortal token?" Sang Zhu had already regained her composure. She respectfully bowed and said, "Reporting to Fairy Maiden, I am a princess of the Qi Empire's imperial family. Although I haven't truly entered the immortal sect, I have been sheltered by the immortal sect since I was a child. When I was a year old, I was bestowed with an immortal token." As she spoke, she presented the token with both hands. Shen Yuanin swept her eyes over it. It was indeed an immortal sect immortal token. She nodded and said, "The Sea of Purgatory is a dangerous place. You should immediately withdraw lest you die here." She turned to leave. "Fairy Maiden, please wait a moment," Sang Zhu hurriedly said. Shen Yuanin stopped, her eyes cold and indifferent. As Sang Zhu saw that she wasn't easily moved, she quickly changed tactics. She no longer dared to use weakness to gain sympathy. She respectfully said, "Fairy Maiden's great graciousness in saving my life is something that Sang Zhu will never forget. I wonder if there is anything I can do for Fairy Maiden." She glanced around and was overjoyed to see that Shen Yuanin didn't refuse. The Qi Empire's imperial family has always respected the immortal sect. If Emperor Father and the elders of the family were to learn that Sang Zhu has received Fairy Maiden's kindness without repaying it, they would surely punish me. I ask Fairy Maiden to give me a chance to repay this debt." As she spoke, she respectfully knelt down. Shen Yuanin said, "If you are willing, then follow me for the time being and protect me while I cultivate." Qin Yu's senses weren't wrong, she had indeed been injured. But the most important reason was the backlash of her cultivation method. Shen Yuanin shouldn't have activated the sublime lost emotion code in the near future in order to avoid triggering hidden dangers. It could be seen that Qin Yu's heart lake had fluctuated twice and he had no choice but to suppress it with his cultivation method. Thinking about it carefully, Qin Yu had to bear a considerable part of the responsibility for her current condition. Sang Zhu was overjoyed. "I will follow Fairy Maiden's instructions." She bowed and lowered her head, her voice respectful. The hellish evil spirit fled and the yellow spring's fog scattered. Qin Yu easily left. He flew for 2 hours before stopping. His divine sense erupted and swept out. After determining that he was temporarily safe, he landed and placed Feng Yunyun on the ground. In the infinite realm, Qin Yu had been framed by the immortal sect cultivators, and only this woman had testified against him. If it weren't for this, Qin Yu wouldn't have done anything and Feng Yunyun would have already died. Of course, reality proved that sticking to one's bottom line was always rewarded with good fortune. Qin Yu saving her was the same as indirectly saving himself. Otherwise, that hellish evil spirit that was pretending to be sleeping wouldn't be easy to deal with. As he hurried along, he had already examined her. Now, he placed a hand between her eyebrows and carefully sensed her for several breaths of time. Qin Yu revealed a relaxed expression. Although she was a bit weak, her condition was stable. She would recover after some time. However, this was the Sea of Purgatory. There was no such thing as an absolutely safe environment. With Feng Yunyun's current condition, she would soon die without protection. But, Qin Yu wanted to hunt down the water demon, so it was impossible for him to bring her with him. This was a problem. He shook his head. He took out several recovery pills and fed them to Feng Yunyun. Then, he closed his eyes and began to meditate. He would wait until she woke up before discussing this matter. 2 cultivators flew at a low altitude. One of them suddenly stopped and turned to look at the ground, a look of surprise on his face. At this time, the other person also sensed something. He turned and their eyes collided. This fluctuation, there's something wrong. The second person licked his lips. That's right. It gives me the feeling that a treasure is about to appear. The air suddenly fell silent. The 2 people revealed a blazing heat in their eyes. The Sea of Purgatory was indeed dangerous, but there were also many good fortunes within. The 2 of them had already obtained some harvests. Come, let's go take a look. The 2 people landed. A canyon appeared in front of them. As they approached, the fluctuations became increasingly strong. Originally, they only had suspicions, but now they were almost certain that there was a treasure here. Although the 2 were pleasantly surprised, they didn't lose their vigilance. They used various methods to investigate the canyon and determined that there weren't any dangers. Without further words, the 2 cultivators jumped down. Soon, there were 2 excited cries from within the canyon, as if they had obtained a great harvest. But for some unknown reason, their cries were soon filled with panic. At first, there were some sounds of movement, but then everything fell silent. The canyon on the ground began to slowly close up. A moment later, everything was flat, without any trace of its previous appearance. After another period of time, dirt and sand rose up from the ground, condensing into a large bald man. He stretched out his waist and crackling sounds came from his joints. Ooh! I woke up and there's dessert. What a comfortable life. He revealed a simple and honest smile. He sniffed his nose and couldn't help but frown. There's a stench. That damned corpse actually hasn't rotted away yet. How disappointing. But since even he has woken up, there should be some movement. I'm really looking forward to it. The large bald man smiled and stepped forwards. His figure suddenly dissipated, and in the next moment he appeared far away. With several more steps, he vanished from sight. At this time, the young miss in the assistant governor's residence had a panic-stricken expression. As she looked at the insects crawling towards her from all directions, her eyes turned white from fear. Although she was a daughter that her father didn't care about, she was still the dignified daughter of the Chu Empire's 3rd assistant governor. Who would dare to harm her? She couldn't think of an answer, because at this time, the young miss had already fainted. Before her consciousness fell into darkness, her last thought was this a dream? But in truth, this really wasn't a dream. Amidst the rustling sounds, extremely ugly bugs with legs under her abdomen crawled all over her body. With the sound of chewing to one's heart's content, her body thinned until all that was left over was a skeleton. With empty eye sockets, she powerlessly looked up at the dim skies. The only thing that comforted her was that all of this happened while she was unconscious, so she didn't feel too much pain. After the insects swallowed the flesh and blood, they all began to twitch. They rolled around on the ground, no longer having the comfortable appearance they had when they were eating. Bang, bang, the insects began to explode, one after another. They were so dense that they looked like firecrackers being lit. In the blink of an eye, the air was flooded with blood. What was even more strange was that this blood fog didn't disperse. Rather, it tumbled in the air, as if it were brewing something. Finally, a blood-red arm stretched out from the blood fog. There was no skin on its surface, so it was dripping with blood. It slowly pressed down between the eyebrows of the skeleton. Strange lines appeared, rapidly extending along the skeleton. When the lines covered every inch of the skeleton, the blood-red arm trembled and collapsed, as if it had exhausted all of its strength. The blood fog scattered with it. All that remained on the ground was a petite skeleton covered with lines. Two black flames suddenly ignited in its empty eye sockets. The skeleton stood up from the ground, its head turning as if it were looking around. In the next moment, it lifted a foot and stomped down. As this foot fell, the ground violently shook. There was a deep rumbling sound that came from deep underground. It was like some vicious beast that had been slumbering deep underground had awakened at this moment. Cracks appeared. Then, the earth collapsed and a giant stone tablet broke through the earth. The stone tablet was 1,000 feet high and a boundless aura wrapped around it. With a single glance, one could tell that it was an ancient object that had existed since ancient times. The words carved on the front were different from what they were now. It was unknown what they meant. On the back was a giant beast that was shaped like a snake. Its mouth seemed to swallow the sun and moon as it roared towards the heavens. If someone stood in the skies and looked down at the sea of purgatory, they would discover that at this moment, there were 12 stone tablets that drilled out from the ground. The words were the same, but the back of each stone tablet was carved with a different giant beast. When the 12 stone tablets appeared, a heart-pounding aura suddenly descended, covering the entire sea of purgatory. As Chin-Yu closed his eyes, he suddenly awoke. A sharp light burst out from his eyes. That aura just now, although he didn't know what had happened, it was like an invisible mountain had fallen on his heart. Even breathing became difficult. At the peak of the snake-like stone tablet, the skeleton held its hands behind its back. Black flames surged in its eye sockets, as if it were waiting for something. But in the end, what it expected didn't happen. The skeleton was silent for a long time. Then, it opened its mouth and laughed. So it wasn't the only one who had placed a stone today. Chapter 577. The walls of the dark and damp cave were inlaid with some sort of green gemstone that emitted a weak light, making this place even more gloomy. On the uneven ground, skeletons were scattered about. Most of them were deathly pale. It seemed that they had died for a long time. But now, there were several new skeletons that were still emitting the stench of blood. His line of sight continued forwards. In the deepest depths of the cave, there was a seemingly small pool of water. At this time, there was the sound of waves and a shadow crawled out. It had hands and feet and its appearance was similar to a human's, but it was extremely ugly. Its face was green and its fangs were like those of a malicious spirit. Its slender eyes swept around its surroundings. It didn't sense anything wrong. It lay on the ground and used its hands and feet, nimbly arriving in front of the stone pillar in the blink of an eye. Right now, there was a woman bound to this stone pillar. She was exceptionally beautiful, but she was unconscious and her pale face made one feel even more pity for her. A scarlet tongue swept across its lips and its slender eyes flashed with lust. It lifted a hand and sharp claws emerged from its fingertips, tearing apart the woman's clothes. She was immediately assaulted by the light of spring. At this time, the unconscious woman suddenly opened her eyes. They were ice cold. She lifted her hand like lightning. At some unknown time, she had already broken free from her shackles and shot straight for the ugly humanoid creature's throat. The timing she chose to launch an attack was also perfect. Unfortunately, this strike didn't obtain the slightest bit of effect. A long tongue wrapped around her wrist. It was exceptionally long, wrapping around her arm until it arrived in front of the woman. The humanoid creature's eyes flashed with a playful light. In the next moment, its tongue violently plunged into the woman's mouth. Then, there was the sound of swallowing that made one's scalp tingle. The woman's eyes widened and twisted, but she couldn't break free at all. Her body rapidly withered, and in the blink of an eye, she was nothing but a bag of bones. Its eye sockets were deeply sunken, revealing withered eyeballs. Then, it turned around twice before completely dimming down. The tongue retracted from the corpse's mouth, but it wasn't willing to let go of the slightest bit of flesh and blood. Only after the last bit of dried skin was it reluctantly retracted. On the ground, there was a new corpse. The ugly creature smacked its lips as if it was savoring the delicious taste of blood and flesh. Its bulging abdomen wriggled as it quickly digested and absorbed the blood. Suddenly, its eyes widened and a cold light shot out from its slender eyes. Then, it began to speak in human language. Interesting. Someone actually came specifically for me, the master of the 9-heaven mirror moon palace of the immortal sect. TSK, the exalted forgotten emotions and the great Tao. Her flesh and blood must be delicious. The one that had been cleanly swallowed just now was one of the female cultivators at Shen Yuanin's side. As for this incomparably ugly humanoid creature, it was the infamous water demon. It could only be said that Shen Yuanin's luck was quite bad. Before she even arrived, she had already been discovered by this monster. The water demon's eyes flashed. Although it had been slumbering in the sea of purgatory for many years, the name of the immortal sect still reverberated in its ears. Even with its strength, it didn't have absolute confidence it could swallow Shen Yuanin, even if she had just become the master of 9-heaven mirror moon palace. The immortal sect's 3 giants each had their own terrifying inheritances. In a critical moment, each of them could erupt with a terrifying strength. Since I can't do it openly, I'll have to use some other methods. The water demon chuckled. A layer of black water suddenly wrapped around it. After it scattered, there was no longer any trace of its previous ugly appearance. It was actually another Shen Yuanin. Her movements and even her aura could be mistaken for the real one. The water demon was born with supernatural powers and was able to transform into a myriad of forms. To it, this was easy. A good show is about to begin, Your Majesty Palace Master. The 27 crystals were scattered around, weaving together into an array formation. They temporarily sealed off the space so that it wasn't known to the outside world. Unless one stepped into the array formation, they wouldn't be able to sense anything even if they approached. Shen Yuanin sat down cross-legged. Her face was cold and beautiful, and her aura was like that of a goddess. No one dared to blaspheme her. Not too far away, Sang Zhu's eyes occasionally fell on her, revealing a deeply concealed burning heat. She didn't know the identity of this female immortal sect cultivator, but there was one thing she was sure of. Within this woman's body, there was a pure aura. It was bone-chilling, yet noble, like a halo of divinity. If she could take this aura for herself, she could definitely help her own body evolve. Once she obtained an extreme own body, even if she lost the hellish evil spirit, she could still obtain the qualifications to fight against her destiny. It was because of this that Sang Zhu had schemed to stay by Shen Yuanin's side. She had been waiting for an opportunity, but Shen Yuanin's aura was far too terrifying. Moreover, her spiritual sense was terrifyingly strong. In these past days, Sang Zhu hadn't been able to find an opportunity. She looked at Shen Yuanin again and forcefully suppressed the greed in her heart. She closed her eyes and told herself that she had to be patient. Because there was only one chance. On a rocky hillside, a figure flew over at a low altitude. He landed on a stone and carefully sensed the extremely rich ice-cold aura in the air. He smiled. That's right, it was this strength. He wasn't too far from the water demon's lair. This figure was Qin Yu. On the day that he had saved Feng Yunyun, this woman had woken up half a day later. Although she thanked Qin Yu over and over again, her eyes were still guarded against him. After being saved by a stranger for no reason, it was normal for her to have such a reaction. Qin Yu was well aware that the reason was because he was hiding his identity, so he didn't care. After asking, Feng Yunyun said that she had a treasure on her that could isolate her aura and form a small space that she could use to recuperate. Qin Yu watched as she activated the treasure and carefully sensed that as long as his luck wasn't too bad, there shouldn't be any problems. Then, he bid his farewells. Time was tight to begin with and it was impossible for him to bring Feng Yunyun along with him. This result couldn't be any better. Because of this, Feng Yunyun, who had always been on guard against him, felt a bit embarrassed. But Qin Yu left just like that. Looking at his fading back, Feng Yunyun didn't even have time to apologize. She could only sigh inwardly, thinking that there were still good people in this world. After Qin Yu and Feng Yunyun separated, it was now the 14th day since they entered the Sea of Purgatory. Nearly half of the 1-month deadline had passed. Luckily, he was about to arrive. However, the water demon was tyrannical. According to the records of the demonic path, it had the strength of a Calamity Immortal Realm Supreme Elder. It was at least comparable to a 3rd-level Calamity Immortal. Originally, with Wei Jia and the others helping him, he had some chances of success. But now that he was alone, his chances of success were less than 10%. If he acted hastily, let alone hunting down the water demon, he feared he might even lose his life in vain. Along the way, Qin Yu was constantly thinking. But how could the disparity in absolute strength be so easily made up for? In addition, the purple-back blue-wing ants hadn't completed their 2nd transformation yet. Otherwise, he would have one more card in his hand. He shook his head and suppressed these chaotic thoughts. When the boat reached the bridge, it would naturally straighten itself out. Thinking too much about it was useless. He would take things one step at a time. Perhaps an opportunity was right in front of him. Stepping forwards, Qin Yu continued forwards. But before he could find a way to hunt down the water demon, he first encountered a group of vengeful cultivators. Fellow Daoist, please wait a moment. Several people stopped in the distance. One of them flew over and swept his eyes over Qin Yu. Seeing that he was hiding his aura, he didn't dare to be rude. To be able to rush deep into the Sea of Purgatory by himself, one didn't need to be a genius to know that this wasn't an ordinary person. Qin Yu asked, "What is it?" Although these people didn't show any signs of danger, he still didn't dare to underestimate them. The cultivator cupped his hands together. "May I ask, fellow Daoist, have you encountered this woman here?" As he spoke, he took out a jade slip. As he poured magic power into it, the jade slip emitted a bright light that projected the figure of a woman. Qin Yu's heart shook and he almost revealed a strange expression. Luckily, his mind was strong enough. He maintained his composure and said, "I haven't seen her." The cultivator revealed a disappointed expression but didn't say anything. He cupped his hands together and left. Qin Yu furrowed his eyebrows. Although the projection wasn't too clear, that cold aura and indifferent eyes left a deep impression on him. Just what trouble had that woman provoked? But thinking about it, with her icy cold appearance, even if she was beautiful, it would only take a moment for her to form a grudge. But after that, Qin Yu encountered 2 more groups of cultivators, both of them looking for Shen Yuanyin. This time, he was truly curious. He looked for a reason to ask a few questions. Although the other party's words were vague, he still understood the approximate reason. His complexion became strange. It turned out that these people were seeking revenge because their loved ones and friends had perished under Shen Yuanin's hands. And the reason they died was because they had been plucked to death. The so-called plucking was one of the yin and yang dual cultivation methods. In the cultivation world, it wasn't considered a shameful cultivation method. When one's Tao companion cultivated together, they would usually practice it once or twice. Plucking was one of the pleasures of the boudoir, but it could also promote the cultivation of both parties. There were many benefits to it. But in dual cultivation, there were also some extremely ruthless methods. Through the intercourse of yin and yang, one could plunder another's cultivation and life force in order to increase their strength. Killing someone was one of the cruelest methods. Although he had only seen her twice and the results weren't pleasant, after learning the truth, Qin Yu's first thought was that it was impossible. That woman's cold and indifferent demeanor wasn't an act at all. If it was said that she killed people in a fit of rage, he could accept it. But to say that she had done something improper to harm others, Qin Yu didn't believe it from the bottom of his heart. But these three groups of cultivators had all held jade slips that clearly contained Shen Yuanin. Even if they wanted to pluck her, there was no need for them to do it here. Moreover, they wouldn't do it in such an unscrupulous manner, right? This couldn't be explained at all. Qin Yu's lips twitched. He felt that there was something wrong with his brain. Why was he meddling in other people's business? Whether that woman was good or bad, whether she was seeking death or being wrongly accused, he would let her do as she pleased. In any case, they had only met by chance and there wasn't the slightest bit of friendship between them. However, for so many people to come to seek revenge was actually good news for Qin Yu. With just himself, it was nearly impossible for him to hunt down the water demon. Borrowing the strength of others was the best choice. And this place just happened to be not too far from the water demon's lair. Qin Yu's eyes flashed. His thoughts raced as he tried to think of a method to draw everyone out. Although it would be nice to be the fisherman that reaps the benefits, it wasn't a simple matter. Shen Yuanin stopped. She took out a jade plate and probed it with her divine sense. After several breaths of time, she put it away. That's right, the water demon's lair was nearby. She turned and lightly said, "Sang Zhu, you can leave." What followed was a bitter battle. Even she didn't have absolute confidence she could win. Sang Zhu was anxious, but she didn't reveal any of it on her face. She only said, "I still haven't repaid you at all. I asked that fairy maiden allow me to stay a little longer." Shen Yuanin was expressionless. "I don't want to say the same words a second time." Sang Zhu clenched her teeth so hard that they nearly broke. But after spending some time together, she understood Shen Yuanin's temperament. Since she said something like this, there was no turning back. If she said anything more, it would be even worse. She squeezed out a smile and bowed. "If that's the case, then fairy maiden take care." Shen Yuanin turned to leave. But at this time, two cultivators flew towards her. One was a man and one was a woman, their auras tyrannical. "You slut, it's you." The man was startled for a moment before he roared out in anger. His eyes were cruel to the extreme. "Give me back my son's life." As he spoke he attacked. Brilliant sword light instantly pierced through the vast skies, a wild killing intent shaking the heavens and earth. Shen Yuanin frowned. She lifted a hand and thrust forwards, instantly freezing the sword light. "Who are you?" The female cultivator across from her screamed, "I am the one who will take your life." She lifted a hand and slapped between her eyebrows. The space between her eyebrows split open and a blood-red light flashed, turning into a sword. Shen Yuanin's eyes were icy cold. After reaching large success of the sublime lost emotion code, she killed as she pleased. She no longer had any compassion for the myriad beings in the world. This man and woman's heavy attacks had aroused her killing intent. She no longer held back. Paw, the frozen sword light shattered into countless pieces. The man stuffily coughed and blood flowed out from the corners of his lips. His eyes were filled with shock. Little sister be careful. But this warning was too late. Shen Yuanin pointed a finger and the blood-red light condensed into a sword that trembled and collapsed. The light in the woman's eyes instantly faded away. Her life sword had been destroyed and her soul had been extinguished. The man held on to her corpse and roared out like a wild beast, "Slut, my family was kind enough to save you, but in the end you've fallen to such a state. You will die a horrible death." Bang! A terrifying sword intent shot into the skies. It was like a lighthouse in the dark night, known in all directions. In the next moment, this monstrous sword cut down. The man's face was drained of blood and he had died. Shen Yuanin's face didn't change at all. She flicked her sleeves and space twisted. As the heaven-shaking sword fell in, it was crushed to pieces. Although this seemed casual, she couldn't help but furrow her eyebrows, a weary look on her face. Sang Zhu's eyes brightened. She had long suspected that there was a problem with this incomparably powerful female cultivator's body. Otherwise, why would she need to be on guard during their cultivation journey? The scene in front of her undoubtedly confirmed this. Perhaps the opportunity she had been searching for was now right in front of her. Whoosh, whoosh, the sound of breaking air filled the air. From afar, one could see beams of light hurtling towards them at an astonishing speed. In the distance, space began to collapse. There were even several people who didn't hesitate to break through the void to arrive. Without exception, when these cultivators saw Shen Yuanin, they all gnashed their teeth, killing intent boiling in their eyes. "It's her. You killed my beloved disciple. Today you will die. Kill her and burn her bones to ashes. You evil woman, let's see where you run off to." With a roar, a thick aura locked onto Shen Yuanin. She frowned. She flicked her sleeves and a massive divine palace phantom appeared above her head. An icy cold and dignified voice, stimulated by her powerful cultivation, spread out in all directions. "I am a direct disciple of the immortal sect. Who are you that you dare to surround me?" Killing intent billowed around everyone. As they heard this, their complexions changed. Immortal sect, to be able to summon the projection of an immortal palace, there was no doubt that she was a direct disciple. Moreover, she was one of the highest existences, one with an incomparably honored status. The demonic path was famous for protecting their own, and the immortal sect's ability to hold grudges was also well known. If they killed this woman, there would surely be trouble for them. Seeing that she had awed them, Shen Yuanin continued to say, "I do not know any of you. There must be some misunderstanding here." A female cultivator screamed, "Misunderstanding? Even if you turned to ashes, I would still recognize you." Her eyes swept around. "So what if you are a direct disciple of the immortal sect? A life for a life is the highest principle of the heavenly Tao. You might be afraid of me, but I'm not. At worst I'll just die." Shen Yuanin frowned. "Who are you? At this point you still dare to quibble? Do you think all of us have admitted our wrongs?" The female cultivator's voice was shrill and shrill. "Open your eyes wide and look carefully. Is this woman in front of you your enemy? There's no mistake, it's her. Appearances can be changed, but aura cannot be wrong. Even if you are someone from the immortal sect, you cannot be forgiven for doing such a cruel and unforgivable thing. It's her, it's her." Shen Yuanin coldly said, "During this period of time, I have been together with this woman. I haven't taken a single step away from her." Shua, countless eyes gathered on Sang Zhu. The crowd cried out, "Your Highness Sang Zhu." They actually recognized her. In the Qi Empire's diplomatic mission, there was a prince and a princess. They had both entered the Sea of Purgatory, and as soon as everyone heard their names, they were able to recognize them. If they could obtain the testimony of a princess, then even if it couldn't completely wash away the suspicions of Shen Yuanin, it would at least calm everyone down. But at this time, Sang Zhu's mind was spinning with another thought. With Shen Yuanin's temperament, she was as cold as an ice statue. Unless she had no other choice, she would never explain herself. Now that she had said so much, the only explanation she could think of was that with her current condition, she wouldn't be able to withstand a great battle. Her thoughts raced. After several breaths of time, Sang Zhu made her decision. Now was the best chance, she absolutely could not miss it. With her mind set, Sang Zhu didn't hesitate any longer. She looked up, a look of panic on her face. "Everyone, save me." Sang Zhu was forced by her. "That woman was injured not too long ago. If I wait for her to recover, both you and I will die here." Her words were vague and unclear, but at this time, it was enough. Shen Yuanin paused for a moment. Her eyes were ice cold as she looked at Sang Zhu. In the eyes of others, this was the anger of someone who had been exposed. "What else do you have to say, you slut? Kill her. The law doesn't punish too many people. So what if it's the immortal sect? As long as no one speaks of her, how can the immortal sect know that she died under our hands?" Sang Zhu's words became the final straw that broke everyone's hearts. Of course, the other reason was that what someone said before was correct. Everyone present had been contaminated by this karma. Only an idiot would speak of it. The Sea of Purgatory had suffered countless casualties this time. The death of an immortal sect direct disciple wasn't remarkable at all. Killing her wouldn't be too troublesome. Shen Yuanin could clearly feel the killing intent in everyone's hearts. She lifted a hand and pointed behind her. Sang Zhu's heart chilled. She hid behind someone, and in the next moment, the cultivator in front of her was covered in ice. Kacha, cracks appeared and the cultivator broke into countless pieces. His corpse fell to the ground. This scene left Sang Zhu deathly pale. If she hadn't been prepared, the one to die would have been her. Attack! Kill! Shen Yuanin killed everyone, setting off the prelude to a great battle. Cultivators all attacked with hate in their hearts. To be able to rush into the Sea of Purgatory's forbidden land, whether it was alone or together, their strength couldn't be underestimated. Now that they attacked together, the light of supernatural powers flooded the world. The dazzling light was an extremely terrifying destructive strength. But at this moment, Shen Yuanin erupted with a strength that surpassed all imaginations. She lifted her hands and the phantom of the immortal palace above her spread out, protecting her within. All of the supernatural powers fell into the immortal palace phantom. Their strength rapidly weakened until they vanished from sight. This scene caused everyone's pupils to shrink. To be able to block all of their attacks, how could the word terrifying describe her strength? Did an immortal sect female cultivator with such a cultivation need to pluck her? Thinking deeper, what sort of status did a female cultivator with such a cultivation have in the immortal sect? Their hearts trembled. They feared that there really was a misunderstanding here. But with things having come to this step, could they still explain it? Even if they did, would this cold-faced immortal sect female cultivator let them go? Would the immortal sect show mercy? Clenching their teeth, a cold light flashed in their eyes. Now, they had no other choice. Even if they knew they were wrong, they could only continue their mistake to the end, and kill her. As long as she died, everything would be over. Everyone would have a guilty conscience in their hearts and no one would say anything. Bang, bang, for a time, the light of supernatural powers didn't diminish at all. Rather, it became even more terrifying than before. Shen Yuanyin had a faint expression. She could naturally feel the changes in everyone's mood. The depths of her eyes became increasingly cold. She lifted a hand and pointed at the void. Several fingers fell down and strong winds rose up, causing the surrounding temperature to rapidly fall. White snowflakes fluttered down from above. They fell fast and dense, covering the earth in an instant. Each of these snowflakes contained an extremely terrifying coldness. As soon as they came into contact with flesh and blood, they would immediately merge with it. Soon, the surrounding cultivators all revealed horrified expressions. The magic power in their bodies stagnated and the flow of blood slowed down. It was as if their entire bodies were frozen solid. To block the attacks with one hand and then attack everyone with the other, and with such a strong and fierce attack, this awakened the fear they felt towards the immortal sect. The momentum of the attack slowed down. Many people retreated, trying their best to avoid being covered by the snowflakes. At this time, a figure broke through the snow and appeared outside the immortal palace phantom. This was a handsome youth. He had a graceful bearing and a cold light surged in his starry eyes. He lifted a hand and punched out. Bang! A wild strength was gathered into this fist. The immortal palace phantom caved in and began to twist. The majestic palaces were twisted apart, causing chaos and chaos to descend. The youth was forced back by the formidable strength. Every step he took shattered space. His complexion paled and he finally spat out a mouthful of blood. But as he spat out blood, Shen Yuanyin frowned. She revealed a pained expression and her eyes darkened. The immortal palace phantom collapsed. The youth stopped. His eyes were as cold as lightning. Everyone, if you don't attack now, when will you? Everyone that had just retreated had a vicious light in their eyes once more. While she was sick, they would take her life. Shen Yuanyin took a deep breath. Faint traces of white light broke out from her body, making her seem incomparably pure and holy, as if she were about to ascend to immortality. In the next moment, this white light wrapped around her. She was like a meteor that cut through the horizon. All that blocked her was crushed to pieces. Her speed was inconceivably fast as she vanished from sight. She escaped. Everyone stopped, their complexions distressed. The youth formed hand seals and shot out several blood balls. I have already placed a mark on her body. With these blood balls, I can sense her position. We must eliminate all evil. We cannot allow this woman to escape and continue harming the world. These words were filled with righteousness. Everyone was overjoyed. They expressed their thanks and took the blood beads, howling away based on their senses. They could not allow this immortal sect female cultivator to live, otherwise they would all die. They were clearly seeking revenge and standing on the side of righteousness, but things had actually progressed to such a degree. It wasn't that no one regretted their actions, but that it was already too late. They had to kill her. Sang Zhu forcefully suppressed her shock. Brother 17. The youth turned around. His eyes flashed and he smiled. So royal sister was also here. Now isn't the time to speak. You and I should also follow. We must kill this woman. As he spoke, a cold chill filled the air. Sang Zhu respectfully nodded. I will follow Brother 17's orders. The two of them held away. Sang Zhu fell behind. As she looked at the youth's back, her eyes were cloudy and uncertain. She never knew that the usually low-key and patient old 17 would actually possess such formidable strength. It really wasn't a lie that the emperor races were filled with crouching tigers and hidden dragons. Qin Yu frowned, his complexion a bit ill. According to the demon envoy's instructions, he should have been able to lock onto the Watergloom's aura. But now, after using the secret art, his senses were blurred. Could it be that the changes in the Sea of Purgatory had affected the effect of the secret art? If so, then things would become troublesome. Although he had drawn out the approximate range of the Waterglim's location, this range covered at least 1,000 miles. If he wanted to slowly search through this area, it would take a great deal of time. He simply couldn't afford to delay. Thinking of this, Qin Yu's eyes became increasingly gloomy. At this time, there was the sound of breaking air in his ears. His heart chilled and he looked up to see a mass of white light howling towards him. Its speed was astonishing and the aura it emitted was swift and fierce. However, as he saw this white light fly over his head and not stop or reveal any ill intent, Qin Yu relaxed a little. He didn't want to meddle in the current situation, so he turned to leave. But suddenly, the white light that flew over his head collapsed and dissipated, revealing the unconscious figure of a woman that fell from the air. It was her. Her face was deathly pale and her aura was weak to the extreme. At this moment, Qin Yu didn't know why, but he suddenly felt a sour feeling in his heart. By the time he reacted, he had already flown over. He revealed a hesitant look in his eyes, but in the end, he caught Shen Yuanyin by the waist and landed on the ground. She was unconscious and her appearance was still cold and distant, but she lacked the aura that pushed people away from her for 1,000 miles. She weakly leaned against Qin Yu's chest, looking frail and weak. Qin Yu bitterly smiled. The two of them couldn't be considered enemies, but they definitely weren't friends either. Thinking back to the unpleasant encounter they had before, it was already benevolent of him not to hit her while she was down. But if he saved her, would that cause trouble for himself? Reason told Qin Yu that he shouldn't meddle in this matter. But, after a long period of silence, he didn't let go. Damn, he really was crazy. In the past, he never discovered that he had the potential to be obsessed with women. Or was it because he never had a chance to put it into practice? Perhaps teasing himself was a way to comfort himself. He didn't know if it would work on others, but at the very least, Qin Yu felt a little better. He looked down at Shen Yuanyin and shook his head. Then, his figure flashed and he rapidly flew away. Although he didn't know who was chasing her, he didn't need to be an idiot to know that someone that could force such a powerful woman to such a degree was absolutely terrifying. Of course, it was best to leave as soon as possible. Saving her was already stupid enough. If he were to throw himself into danger because of this, then he really would become a joke. Schwa, schwa. Chapter 578. The altar was made of stone. It was wide at the bottom and narrow at the top. After countless years of erosion, it had been damaged in many places, making it seem bleak and desolate. But as one looked down, one could still feel the majesty and dignity of the altar that hadn't yet faded away. Several figures stood beneath the altar, looking at its dilapidated state. Their eyes were bitter but also a bit excited. One of them was an old man with white hair. His face was covered in layers of wrinkles, each one filled with the aura of time. With a loud thud, he fell to his knees. His body trembled as he kissed the earth. Turbid tears rolled down his cheeks. The descendants are unfilial, bringing shame to our ancestors. The people around him also knelt down. They clenched their fists, heavy expressions on their faces. Zhang Lingtian was the first to stand up. He slowly said, "Great-granduncle, since we were able to find this place, it is because our ancestors are protected by the heavens. There is no need for you to worry too much." The old man wiped away his tears. "Your Highness is right. It was all my fault. I couldn't suppress my emotions for a moment." He looked at the altar. "The Emperor's seal is here. As long as you can obtain it, your Highness will obtain it. An invisible destiny will be added to your body." Zhang Lingtian bowed, solemnly saluting. I'll have to trouble great-granduncle. The old man revealed a solemn expression. This is my duty. My branch of the clan was born for this purpose. Your Highness, please wait a moment. We will immediately ask for the Emperor's seal. He waved his hand. Several people behind him stood up. With a bit of silence, they scattered around the altar. Begin. The old man said. Outside the altar, several people cut their palms at the same time. Dark red blood gushed out. But as the blood dripped down, it was attracted by an invisible strength and floated in midair. A humming sound came from deep within the ruined altar. It carried with it the weakness and exhaustion of countless years of slumber, as well as an unconcealable restlessness. The complexions of those who bled changed. Their faces paled. Then, the floating blood stretched out and connected to the altar. As it absorbed the blood, the ground trembled. Dark golden runes appeared on the surface of the altar. At first, they were messy and incomplete. But as they increased in number, they gradually linked together, forming an incomparably complex array diagram. However, due to the destruction of the altar, some parts of the diagram had been damaged, causing the power of the formation to be unable to circulate. The old man's eyes swept over the damaged parts of the array diagram. He paused for several breaths of time and sighed inwardly. Then, he made up his mind. Your Highness, all of our clan's hopes rest on you. I hope that Your Highness will be careful in the future and live up to the clan's expectations. Zhang Lingtian bowed, his expression firm like stone. I will remember Granduncle's teachings. Lin Weiwei knelt on the ground and paid her respects in place of her elder brother. She knew very well what kind of price her granduncle and the others would have to pay. Your name will definitely be recorded in the family tree and remembered by future generations. We will be eternally grateful. The old man smiled, and the wrinkles on his face smoothed out. He seemed much younger. He had been waiting for this day his entire life. Thinking back to the hesitation and unwillingness in his heart, he could not help but mock himself. Sure enough, after living for a long time, one would instinctively cherish life. Fortunately, although he cherished his life, he did not forget the responsibility he carried. He stepped forwards and floated above the altar. He spread out his arms and blood-red light drilled out from his body, submerging him within. This blood-red light seemed to have a mind of its own. It flew down on its own, falling onto the damaged parts of the array diagram. It wriggled and fused into it, repairing it. All around the altar, several people with blood dripping from their hands revealed expressions of sorrow. As they looked at the old ancestor being submerged in the blood-red light, most of the resentment in their hearts dissipated. Perhaps it was as the old ancestor had said. This was the mission of their bloodline, and it had already been decided long ago. Closing their eyes, several people silently stirred the blood-red light in their palms. The humming from within the altar became even louder, adding a bit more strength to it. Golden runes slowly grew out from the damaged parts of the array diagram. When it was completely repaired, the blood-red light above the altar suddenly converged. The old man had vanished from sight, leaving behind nothing but ashes. He had used his life to repair the array diagram, exhausting everything. Bang! The golden runes shined brightly, condensing into a golden beam of light that smashed into the heavens. It shattered space, connecting to some unknown place. The cultivators standing around the altar with their eyes closed suddenly stiffened. Faint traces of ash gray rose up from beneath their feet, quickly spreading to every part of their bodies. This color was extremely gloomy and exuded a sense of extermination. Suddenly, a gust of wind blew up. Just like the old man, their bodies disintegrated in the wind. There wasn't even the slightest bit of life left. Zhang Lingtian struggled to stand up straight, his expression deep with grief. Lin Weiwei's eyes were red and large drops of tears flowed down her cheeks. The bloodline of the emperor clan had withered and there were only a few left. Today, another bloodline would be cut off. Was it really worth it for the emperor's seal? But this was her big brother's decision and the clan had prepared for this for countless years. She had no way of questioning him. She could only follow him and remember everything that happened today. If the emperor clan truly returned to their glory one day, then those who sacrificed themselves today would receive the honor and glory they deserved. A golden beam of light shot out from the altar, shattering space and connecting to some unknown place. Invisible waves of energy swept out in all directions. However, this altar seemed to have an invisible strength that covered up space, not allowing the outside world to know what was happening. After a moment, a giant bronze coffin flew out from the shattered space. There wasn't the slightest bit of decoration on its surface, as if the person buried within disdained to use any external objects to show off their dignity. From this alone, it could be seen just how arrogant the person who was buried here was when they were alive. Zhang Lingtian's complexion changed. This was because the scene in front of him was completely different from what he knew. There was no emperor's seal at all. Why would this bronze coffin descend through the altar? He grabbed onto Lin Weiwei and turned to leave. Although he didn't know what was in the bronze coffin, he could feel an endless pressure pressing down on his heart. But before the two of them could leave, the entire space froze over. An invisible dignity carried with it a vast and terrifying aura, imprisoning this part of the world. The bronze coffin fell onto the altar. The heaven-shaking aura it released suddenly vanished without a trace. Although Zhang Lingtian regained his freedom, he didn't flee with Lin Weiwei. Instead, he respectfully knelt down and kowtowed. If he wanted to kill them, he could have done so just now. Since he held back, there must be some other reason. Of course, the most important point was that after experiencing the might of the bronze coffin, Zhang Lingtian didn't have the slightest confidence that he could escape with his little sister. If so, then he might as well stay put. Creak, with a light sound, the bronze coffin's lid opened. A pale white hand reached out and grabbed onto the coffin. From the coffin, a middle-aged man walked out. He wore an emperor crown and 9 dragon robes. His eyes surged with divine light, as if he could control the sun, moon, and stars with a single movement. Within this bronze coffin was a great emperor. His entire body was filled with death energy, but he still retained a trace of vitality. Life and death energies intertwined, diametrically opposed to each other. But they flowed freely, forming a system of their own, stable and unending. It was truly strange. His eyes fell on Zhang Lingtian and Lin Weiwei. His eyes flashed and he said, "How many years have passed since the founding of the nation? How is the power of the nation?" Zhang Lingtian was excited. Although he found it hard to believe, he had already recognized that this great emperor in front of him who seemed to have come back from the dead was the founding ruler. The portrait enshrined in the ancestral temple and the jade slip that had been passed down to this day were exactly the same as the person in front of him. Moreover, that emperor aura that suppressed the highest heavens couldn't be faked at all. Reporting to the ancestor ruler, the Great Show has been founded for 25 million years and the country has collapsed for 40 million years. The emperor clans have withered and there is only a single city left. Bang! The altar shook and the skies changed colors. Fog tumbled, as if a million divine mountains were condensing and descending. Zhang Lingtian's body shivered. He spat out a mouthful of blood, his face deathly pale. The founding emperor was enraged. "When I was buried, I left behind a posthumous edict. If the country is unstable, I can be awakened from my slumber. How dare you disrespect me?" Zhang Lingtian didn't dare to argue. He only lowered his head and admitted his crimes. Luckily, that sky-toppling aura soon dispersed. The founding emperor had a gloomy expression. "Speak. What happened?" There had to be some accident. Zhang Lingtian suppressed the discomfort in his body. He respectfully said, 40 million years ago, the empire was filled with the smoke of war. The ancestors of my clan wanted to summon the emperor's seal to support the destiny of the nation. As for what happened, no one knows. All I know is that the summoning process didn't go smoothly, and all the ancestors that participated died in a single day. At that time, the empire was in a precarious situation. After this strike, it was unable to recover. A million years of war later, the land was divided into 7. Then, he explained the current situation of the 7 empires in the land of divinity and demons. As Zhang Lingtian finished speaking, he carefully glanced at the silent ancestor sovereign, his mind in chaos. The emperor's seal that was passed down through the generations and could obtain the destiny of the emperor was actually the founding emperor. If the nation was unstable and the ancestor sovereign was awakened, could the great Zhou dynasty be preserved? But this hypothesis no longer held any meaning. No matter what the reason was, the great Zhou dynasty had already been destroyed for 30 million years. After a long silence, the founding emperor looked up. Divine light surged in his eyes, as if he had crossed through the river of time and returned to the distant past. After a long time, he gently sighed, as if he had gained some enlightenment. I fought for millions of years and finally unified the world. I established a transcendent cause, combining my body with the destiny of the nation to suppress all. Because of this feeling, in order to avoid calamity, I fell into a deep slumber, but I didn't expect that I wouldn't be able to preserve the emperor clan and continue the inheritance of the nation. His eyes fell. Rise. The 2 of you have awakened me from my slumber and have performed a great merit for the emperor clan. In the future, you will be rewarded. Zhang Lingtian and Lin Weiwei hurriedly knelt down in thanks. The founding emperor flicked his sleeves and an invisible strength wrapped around the 2 of them. He put away the bronze coffin and stepped out, vanishing from sight. In capital. Great Chu Imperial Palace. His Majesty the Emperor sat alone in a secret chamber. He looked at the star atlas, at the bright star that suddenly lit up. His eyes were dignified. There were 7 emperor stars in the world, but now an 8th had appeared. Moreover, it was so bright that the instant it appeared, it erupted with light that nearly covered the entire star atlas. The 8th emperor of the world, no, perhaps he should be called the first emperor of all eternity. The ancient rumors were true. The one who established the great Zhou dynasty, the one who ruled over all the heavens, was actually still alive. Although he was already prepared in his heart, as he witnessed this scene with his own eyes, endless waves were set off in the emperor's powerful mind. After a long time, Mi Ganyuan took a deep breath. He suppressed the tumbling waves in his heart and his eyes burst out with confidence. So what if the founding emperor of the great Zhou dynasty was called the first emperor of all eternity? The current world was no longer the territory of the great Zhou dynasty. He was the most powerful emperor in this world. If everything went smoothly, he could borrow the power of purgatory to suppress him, refine his flesh and blood, and plunder his imperial destiny. He would have a chance of inheriting the transcendent emperor godhood and obtaining the approval of the heavens and earth. At that time, what did the immortal sect or demonic path matter? Unifying the world wasn't without hope. On the long snake stone tablet, black flames rose up in the skeleton's eye sockets. He was silent for a long time and then he sighed. He is truly worthy of being the Chu Empire's great emperor. He actually has such courage and breadth of mind to do such extraordinary things. 12 stone tablets appeared. Everything within the sea of purgatory could be sensed. The solemn Chu Emperor dares to do such a dangerous thing for the sake of his great cause. Since I know of this, how could I not lend you a helping hand? In the peaceful and stable land of divinity and demons, how could it accommodate a race that had been expelled for 1 trillion years? Only when the world was in chaos and everyone was in danger would there be no one who would care about them. The Chu Emperor had placed down a piece and opened a great chess game. He naturally had to add fuel to the fire and not miss out on this heaven-sent opportunity. The skeleton lifted a hand and slapped it. The stone tablets beneath him trembled. The 12 stone tablets connected together and their auras erupted at the same time. Originally, he was still hiding his aura, but now he didn't hold it back anymore. Deep within the sea of purgatory, there was an extremely terrifying and alluring aura that leapt into his senses. Of course, not everyone had the qualifications to touch upon this aura. Only when one's strength reached a certain level and touched upon the source of the world would they be able to sense its existence. In the darkness, pairs of deep eyes suddenly opened. Some were shaken, some were puzzled, but without exception, all of them were filled with joy. No matter what the reason was, hadn't they waited for endless years for this moment? Bang, bang, aura after aura erupted from all over the sea of purgatory. Each aura was so solid that it seemed tangible. Like a burning beacon, it shot into the skies. Within the entire sea of purgatory, all living beings trembled. From the depths of their souls, endless fear rose up. After the Chu Emperor and the mysterious skeleton placed down their pieces, the true great waves arrived. Countless people were frightened and their complexions paled. Although they didn't know what was happening, a great fear rose up in their hearts. The reason for that was because each and every one of those auras were capable of easily crushing them to dust. Within a temporary cave dwelling, Qin Yu's eyes flashed open. A divine light flashed within them, filled with a shaking intent. He lowered his head, his eyes widening as if he had seen something unbelievable. Sea of Purgatory. Sea of Purgatory, so this was the true origin of its name. That's right, at this moment, Qin Yu could feel a magnificent aura being released from deep underground. His cultivation boundary was indeed lacking, but within his soul space, whether it was the cosmic Seacross bell or the purple moon, both of them could make up for this deficiency. I never thought it would be hidden here. Undying whispered. Qin Yu suddenly sensed something. He turned and saw that the woman had woken up. There wasn't a hint of panic on her face. Her cold eyes swept over Qin Yu before looking down at her feet. She had also sensed it. This good fortune is not something you can covet, otherwise you will only be throwing your life away. An icy voice came out from between her teeth, without the least bit of warmth. Shen Yuanyin stood up and walked out. She didn't say a word of thanks or even glance at him. Qin Yu's lips twitched. This was indeed this woman's style. Undying's voice sounded out in his mind. She is right. With Master's current cultivation, you do not have the qualifications to interfere in this struggle for good fortune. Her tone was filled with unwillingness. Qin Yu frowned. Just what is it? You seem to know. Undying bitterly smiled. I can't say. What? With Master's current cultivation, it is impossible for you to know of its existence. Now that you have sensed it through other methods, you have already broken through the taboo. If you probe any further and trigger a resonance of energy, you will surely provoke a disaster. Qin Yu's heart trembled and all the hairs on his back stood up. At this moment, it seemed as if some sort of attention had fallen upon him. Without further explanation, he already believed Undying's words. It was just that it was hard to imagine that there was something in this world that he didn't have the qualifications to know about. If he were to forcefully probe it, a great calamity might befall him. This is true good fortune. Undying couldn't help but say. Qin Yu was silent. He could clearly feel the other party's sigh from these words. Was he being looked down on because his cultivation was too weak? For someone who could at least fight a calamity immortal, for better or worse, it was hard for him to accept this sort of signal. Right now, Undying clearly didn't care about what Qin Yu thought. He bluntly said, Master, there will be great changes in the Sea of Purgatory. You cannot stay here any longer. Before his voice fell, terrifying auras erupted like volcanoes in the darkness. With peerless and tyrannical postures, they broke into his senses. These auras were strong, each one heaven-shaking and earth-shattering. One even suspected that if they were to collide, the entire world would be destroyed. Qin Yu's complexion changed several times. The sour feeling in his heart instantly vanished. Compared to these auras, he was far, far too weak. Standing in front of them, while he wasn't much different from an ant, he wasn't much harder than an egg. He feared that with just a little bit of strength, he would be torn to pieces. Helplessness flashed in his eyes. But Qin Yu knew that undying was right. He really couldn't stay in the current Sea of Purgatory any longer. With these terrifying auras appearing one after another, who knew what would happen next? If he didn't leave, once he was sucked in, he would die without a doubt. If he lost Shuba, he could still find a chance. But if he died, everything would be for naught. He lifted his hand. Light flashed and several jade archives appeared in his hand. Each one was of the highest quality jade. After they were refined, they shined with a dazzling light. Tiny runes tumbled within the light. Before entering the Sea of Purgatory, the great Chu imperial family had bestowed a similar set of jade archives to everyone. With these jade archives, they could lay down a miniature array formation that resonated with Encapital's great array formation and teleport away. With a thought, the jade archives flew up, forming an array formation in the void. Qin Yu lifted a hand and poured magic power into them, activating them. Jade archives lit up and faint fluctuations appeared in space. But at this time, an inexplicable aura arrived, disrupting the array formation. With a series of cracking sounds, the jade archives shattered one after another. On the stone tablet, black flames danced in the skeleton's eye sockets. His lips parted as if he were smiling. Little fellows, for the sake of this liveliness, in order to achieve the best results, I will have to leave you behind. Perhaps you will die, but to be able to see peak powerhouses that have accumulated for hundreds of millions of years release their final energy, you should feel honored. Enjoy this grand ceremony. Shen Yuanin suddenly stopped. A group of panic-stricken cultivators appeared in her line of sight. This was because it wasn't just Qin Yu who had tried to leave the Sea of Purgatory. It was clear that all of them had failed. No one knew what had happened. But it was because of their ignorance that they were even more terrified. Those that had fallen into panic and despair needed a place to vent. Shen Yuanin's appearance at this time was undoubtedly the best choice. It's all because of that slut. No one knew who said this, but everyone subconsciously acknowledged this point. If it weren't for her, how could they have gathered here? If they hadn't gathered here, perhaps this despairing scene wouldn't have occurred. This logic was far-fetched and even completely unreasonable. But in this situation, what meaning did logic have? Kill her. Those that were in despair could often erupt with an even more terrifying destructive power. If one considered things from the dark side, perhaps these people were thinking that even if they had to die here, they had to kill her first. It was like if they killed Shen Yuanin, they would have one more scapegoat. You see, even if they all had to die, at least someone would die in front of them, right? A terrifying aura pierced through space. Dazzling divine light illuminated the world, illuminating Shen Yuanin's pale face as well as her furrowed eyebrows. At this moment, she was at a loss. Death was about to arrive. Had she ever left a mark in this world? Great waves rose up in her mind. Fragmented images splashed into her mind. Shen Yuanin stiffened. Before the overwhelming killing intent arrived, she spat out a mouthful of blood. This was the backlash of the sublime lost emotion code. Behind her, Qin Yu was stunned. He looked at Shen Yuanin, suddenly finding a familiar feeling in her cold and strange back. His mind throbbed and an intense impulse erupted from the depths of his heart. Without any time to think or hesitate, his body instinctively responded. Bang! A formidable strength erupted, directly twisting space. Qin Yu's figure fell in front of Shen Yuanin like a mountain. He lifted a hand and pressed forward. Deep blue light erupted, instantly forming the phantom of an endless sea region. Then, that blinding light, carrying with it a terrifying destructive strength, smashed into it. The sea region phantom violently trembled, instantly on the verge of collapse. Qin Yu stuffily coughed as blood flowed out from his nose and mouth. But he didn't take half a step back. He allowed the wild pressure to press down on him, causing his joints to crackle. Kacha, the sea region phantom that was on the verge of collapse suddenly began to freeze over, instantly strengthening its defenses and sharing some of Qin Yu's pressure. Shen Yuanin's complexion paled and her eyes dimmed. She had exhausted all of her strength. She and Qin Yu were on this side. Across from them was a group of crazed cultivators, and in the middle was a frozen sea. Qin Yu looked at the frozen sea. His thoughts stirred and strange syllables echoed in his mind. Above his head, the sea chart slowly unfurled. A transcendent and noble aura emitted from his body. He lifted his hand and pointed down. Bang! A terrifying beam of light tore through the skies. With unparalleled momentum, it suddenly descended. Beneath it, cultivators widened their eyes, endless fear in their eyes. But beneath this beam of light, let alone resisting, they couldn't even form thoughts of escaping. The ground fiercely shook. Great waves rose up, rolling out in all directions. A 10,000-foot wide hole appeared. It was pitch black, so deep that one couldn't see it. The cultivators that had been standing here had all disappeared. There was a light cracking sound in Qin Yu's mind. Then, he felt a sharp pain, as if a sharp wooden stake had ruthlessly stabbed into him. His complexion paled, without the least bit of blood left. He closed his eyes. Before his consciousness fell into complete darkness, Qin Yu felt himself fall into the arms of a soft and delicate body. A faint fragrance entered his nose. It was strange, but it caused his heart to race. He only felt that it was very soft. But what a pity, he fainted in the next moment. You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.